yesterday was surprised that I lined up with workers who were trying to unionize Amazon and Alabama. Let me get this right. So Amazon gets to be the most woke corporation on the planet. Every day they're proving their wokeness, right? Banning books, not allowing traditional charities to participate in Amazon Smiles, denying President Trump access to Amazon Web Services, and denying his campaign. That every day, get messages about how woke Amazon is. That's fine. I have no problem with that. Be as woke as you want. The problem is that when it comes to tax cuts, then they want our help. When it comes to, they're trying to unionize us, so we might have to pay workers more, then they want our help. If you have a union problem, if you think the taxes for corporations like yours, the biggest in the world, are too high, well, why don't you go get your woke, liberal, leftist friends and have them help you? Here's the bottom line. It's very simple for me. The largest, richest company in the world and a champion of wokeness that all it does is beat up on conservatives versus hardworking Americans who just want to get paid a little more and have better work conditions. It's an easy choice.
All right. My name is Ben Burgess, and this is Give Them an Argument. I am joined, as always, by our producer, Forrest.
What's going on?
Hardest working man in left media, since he's a producer for like 20 shows. And might be an exaggeration. And
it feels like it lately.
In a few minutes, we're going to be talking to Nomiki Konst from the Majority Report and the Nomiki Show. We are going to be talking about the push for Puerto Rican statehood and why that issue might be a little bit more complicated than it looks at first glance. We are going to be talking about friend of the show, Andrew Cuomo, and how
Paisan of the show.
Yeah, how his people are trying to cancel him for Italian culture. I think that's where we've landed on that. And of course about the PRO Act, and on that theme of organized labor, we're going to be talking to a couple of radical teachers union activists, Paul Prescod and Kenzo Shibata, in the second half of the show. We've also got a preview, might be showing you in a few minutes if we can fit it in, of the patron bonus episode for this Thursday, which is a beginner's guide to Kant, part 2. But of course, the voice that you just heard was, oh man, I really should have a bottle of water with me for this.
Rubio
with little Marco, and little Marco has had a road to Damascus moment. He is an ally to the international working class now. He wants one big union to fight the bosses. Okay, Marco Rubio doesn't think any of that shit. He is exactly who he's always been. I have an article about this that came out in Jacobin over the weekend. It's called "Don't Be Fooled. Little Marco is still an enemy of labor." And in it, I break down this op-ed which he wrote in the USA Today, which he was giving a little quick verbal version in that ridiculous video where he's wearing a t-shirt and a baseball cap to show that he's just a regular guy. He's
a working class guy, a working Joe.
Yeah. If you actually read this op-ed, right?
Yeah, this is the headline of it. Senator Marco Rubio: Amazon should face unionization drive without Republican support. And which
is very telling, because the way all of the other news outlets reported it, like the headline everybody else put on this was Marco Rubio comes out in favor of unionizing Amazon. But I think that the headline the USA Today put on it is actually a little bit more accurate to what he said, which is that Amazon should face this unionization effort without Republican support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And his reasoning is way more about culture war issues.
No, it's almost entirely about culture war issues. So he, in Well, actually, in that clip we played at the beginning, it's the cold open. He uses the word wages, higher wages, which is actually a phrase that never appears anywhere in the op-ed. He like the word wages does not come up once. He uses working conditions and workplace conditions once each in the entire op-ed. And when he says workplace conditions, he literally cannot be bothered to stay on topic for an entire sentence. I want to just read you a couple sentences, give a flavor. All right, uniquely malicious corporate behavior like Amazon's justifies a more adversarial approach to labor relations. It's no fault of Amazon's workers. They feel the only option available to them to protect themselves against bad faith is to form a union. Today, it might be workplace conditions, but tomorrow it might be a requirement that the workers embrace management's latest woke human resources fad. So he literally can't stay on the workplace. Like, here are some things that he didn't mention that he could have mentioned in this op-ed. He could have mentioned that Amazon has a crazy high rate of injuries, even for the warehouse industry. It's like 9.6 per thousand, so which is, again, even for warehouses is outrageous. That they have this system of quotas where you end up having like scan a new package like once every 11 seconds, as of one report from I want to say like last year. So that's enforced by this constant electronic surveillance so severe. Like, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about workplace conditions that people literally, like, there are reports of warehouses where people have to pee in bottles because they don't want to get up to use the bathroom, because they're literally being surveilled while they go to the bathroom to see how many steps they take. So if they take the shortest possible route to the bathroom, how many minutes they spend there, how many steps they take back, and meanwhile they're losing, they're getting behind on the quotas. But,
and every movement while they're moving boxes and while they're like moving things is being tracked too. So that, just to make like a more, a more efficient way of moving, which isn't what you do to human beings that are working. That's what you do to machines. You know what I mean? Like they're treated pretty much as machines, and as so that kind of follows in with the bathroom breaks thing, because exactly. It's going to be later on. They're going to say you can only move these like this way, and if you're injured or something on the job, like you're going to have to push through that.
Exactly. I mean, it's it's the Karl Marx line about treating worker as an appendage of flesh to the machine of steel, which by the way ties right into the Beginner's Guide to Kant on reducing people to mere means to an end. But again, little Marco doesn't give a shit about any of that. He doesn't even really pretend to here, right? Like there's the one line where he mentions working conditions without specifying what he means. And there's this one part of one sentence where he says workplace conditions. But of course, it's like he's like he's a junkie, and there's something else he's supposed to be paying attention to, but there is a needle that's like off on the other side of the table. He keeps looking back at it. He can't keep his eyes away from it. All he cares about in this op-ed is the culture war. So his big complaints were some super homophobic sounding book called When Harry Became Sally, that Amazon wouldn't sell it, and that he also kind of referred to this in the clip that they wouldn't that there are some charities that they won't allow to participate in the Amazon Smile program because the Southern Poverty Law Center classifies them as hate groups, and they use that list to decide which charities they'll work with. Like, those are his big complaints, and to the extent that he can be bothered to pretend even that he's interested in economics here, really, like, other than these two glancing references to unspecified working conditions, the economic thing that he's talking about isn't even about the workers. Again, wages are never once mentioned in this op-ed. What he's talking about is Amazon crushing small businesses, which of course are a traditional conservative constituency, small business owners.
Yeah.
And in fact, in the op-ed, right, because look, plenty of conservative small business owners, and of course big business owners who he takes donations from, are afraid of their own workers unionizing. And so, he goes out of his way in the op-ed to make it abundantly clear that he's still an enemy of unions in general. He says a bunch of things in the op-ed like adversarial labor relations. And of course, I mean, if it's not adversarial, I don't know what the fuck the point of the union is. But
and he cast it as an individual struggle, like between Amazon itself as like he calls it like a global corporation and workers in America. So he's kind of casting like this as a specific fight between like a multinational corporation, which most fucking corporations are, but he only sees it as, this one struggle between the biggest in the world and then like the small workers working there. In this specific case,
to the extent that he's even talking about the workers, which again is not for very much. Like it literally takes up like a few sentences, like not more than 5 or 6 sentences scattered around the op-ed is even talking about the workers. And when he does, it's an incredibly vague way. There's nothing about compensation. There's certainly no details about working conditions. But yeah, he says, because it's global, he says if a good American company is targeted for unionization, of course he's against that. And it's weird because he doesn't quite give an example of a good American company. He says like certain American automakers. It's like, which ones, right? Tell me the American automakers that like haven't outsourced any part of their operation, to other countries. I want to know which ones those are. But when he's saying that adversarial labor relations, he thinks he says are generally bad, both for companies and for workers, he claims, because the adversarial labor relations, having unions, makes companies more vulnerable to foreign competition, and the foreign competition, and that in turn means that the workers end up out of a job, and so. It's weird because he never explains and he says that the right of workers to form a union in practice becomes a requirement that companies allow left-wing social organizers. That's the phrase he uses: left-wing social organizers to take over the workplace. And even in the Amazon case, he says it's. That it isn't clear. These are his exact words. It isn't clear whether, he's talking about the drive to unionize the warehouse in Bessemer is primarily driven by complaints from its workers, agitation from Democratic operatives, or just the fact that Jeff Bezos has now become the first person in history worth $200 billion. So that agitation by Democratic operatives, I mean, that's like that phrase, right? Like even in this case, he can't pretend not to hate anyone trying to organize a union. Yeah. Like, I mean, that's like, he's like that turn of phrase. He sounds like a Southern sheriff, talking about how, his local Negroes were perfectly content until, these outside agitators, came in and started riling them up.
Yeah. He also says a thing about like, the only choice they had left was to unionize or something, which as if there were like a bunch of like roads they could have gotten off on where Amazon would have like made a deal with them to pay them better or something, and they wouldn't have needed to unionize. But because Amazon,
he sort of has these two threads. On the one hand, Amazon is so bad, mostly for culture war reasons. Yeah, right? Like he says, and he tries to turn all the culture war crap into a pseudo economic populist thing, and the trick is that he says, Amazon is waging a war on working class values, but of course working class values just means conservative values, which, I mean, obviously empirically there are huge percentages of the working class on every side of every culture war issue. That's how the culture war works. Like that's one of the reasons that culture war polarization is so bad for trying to organize people economically, because it's, because it does tend to cut, like the broader population in half, the more people are focused on that. So, he's obviously just wrong, right? I mean, there are obviously many millions of working class people who he would consider to be too woke, and there are, and also, of course, the nice thing about that cheat code, that working class values, is it lets him pretend that small business owners, or frankly, even big business owners who are conservative Republicans, sort of count as being somehow culturally working class.
I couldn't find it somehow, but I was thinking about that Steven Crowder opening where he's like, by working class we mean small business owners, we mean large business owners, even $1 million businesses. Like working class becomes people who work as like conservative people who work as a class formation.
No, exactly. And so there are really two threads here. Whatever. It's a weird, sloppy article. It looked like, it was so sloppy, I actually think he might have written it himself. Like even
he seems to have gotten a PR person between the article and that video.
Yeah, even just grammatically, it's like a weird article. But but to the extent that he has an argument, he has two arguments. One of them is Amazon is so bad, mostly for culture war reasons, and because of small businesses, so it really has nothing to do with the workers. But Amazon is so bad that this normally horrible thing that the workers are doing, forming a union, is like understandable. He says they're uniquely malicious. They're not like a good American company. So it's forgivable that they're doing this generally bad thing, organizing a union. That's one thread where he says things like, oh, he's standing with the workers. But then the other thread is he says, look, unions are terrible. They're bad for the workers because they lose their jobs because the companies are vulnerable to foreign competition. You shouldn't have adversarial labor relations, but screw Amazon, right? So like he says things like Amazon shouldn't be able to wage war against working class values and then expect Republicans to have their back when they're trying to fight off a unionization effort. Or he says that Amazon should have to, because it's facing this unionization effort, they should have to live according to the same progressive values, he says, that they're trying to push on everyone else. So really, like that second one, I think is much more the real argument, which is essentially like Rubio. It's almost like he's like a cartoon gangster, being like, hey, it's a nice business you have here. It'd be a real shame if someone unionized it and we the party weren't there to protect you against unionizing like we normally would. Like, because taken seriously, if he really believes that unionization is bad because it opens them up to competitors, and he's really concerned about Amazon being crushed by small business, then it's not really has nothing to do with the concern for the workers at all. It's more like, hey, these guys are on the liberal side of the culture war, and frankly, they're not paying up, right? He doesn't make this explicit, but I think like reading between the lines a little, the fact that Jeff Bezos doesn't, donate to, isn't a Republican donor is probably a big part of this too, but like, so it's like, they're not paying, their protection money, so screw them, we'll let them burn. And I guess, look, I want to switch gears and play the preview for the Thursday episode, but I just before Nomiki comes on, but like this is always what kills me about this. Like we were talking about this in a different way last week with the Greenwald, Carlson ban and stuff, but it's really the same thing, and it's just like it makes me sad. Right, because it's all of this stuff. It's like I don't know how else to put it except just like, don't be a fucking rube, right? None of these people are economic populists in any way that's not a complete joke. I mean, they're all Rubio, Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon, Trump.
Another, I guess. Kind of the same, kind of on the same.
It's not just that there not like left-wing social democrats, which they're certainly not, on economic issues, right? Like if there really were socially conservative people who had social democratic positions on economics in the United States, then we'd have some dilemmas in our hands about what to do about them, But we don't have those dilemmas because those people just don't exist in this country. Not only are they not like left-wing social democrats, every single one of those people that I mentioned is like way to the right of the Biden administration on economic issues.
Yeah. Well, a perfect example, I guess. Sorry, I thought of it in the middle of you saying this was Josh Hawley. I don't remember. I think it was CPAC he was speaking in front of pretty recently, and he came out and said something about how the oligarchy, like he's like we need to fight the oligarchy, which is like, it's like they find these like, you know, populist buzzwords, you know what I mean? Like oligarchy is a perfect example, and then in his definition, oligarchy is just tech companies. Like it's just tech companies, and the issue that the oligarchy is waging on Republican voters is just like tech censorship, which is an issue, but that's not the main like point of, you know what I mean? Like any kind of populism. Like
no, of course, yeah, exactly. Right. Like, yes, I mean, tech censorship is bad, although I'd also argue that they don't like it because, you know, they think they're the ones, you know, getting censored. I mean, none of these people are exactly known for their deep principled, you know, commitment to, you know, to free speech. Like, I'm old enough to remember the Bush years. Let's put it that way. But yes, tech censorship is bad. But the point is that for them, it's all about the culture war. And yeah, even that phrase oligopoly, right? You know, it's like in context, what they're talking about is that, like, to the extent that there's any kind of like economic critique at all with the oligopoly, it's just the fact that these people, that like companies like this are bad for you know, for like small businesses in the Republican base. It has absolutely nothing.
Yeah, but even then, they don't usually talk about that. Like, I feel like if every social media site was like Parler, they wouldn't have a complaint. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like when
that's true too. But I mean, like, I think to the extent that they are gesturing at something economic with the oligopoly stuff, it's not economic stuff about workers. You know, it's economic stuff about like smaller businesses, you know, that are competing with them. Okay, I do want to show.
I just want to do it's Rubio.
Yeah. Let's do it. Yeah.
Marco on to refute President Obama's speech. Do you remember that catastrophe? And he's like this, and we were, I need water. Help me. I need water. Help. And this is on live television. This total joke artist. It's Rubio. That's what it. Unbelievable.
Awesome. Yeah. Oh God. Man. I fucking miss Michael Brooks. That was like his favorite Trump bit. But
I know, I don't think I ever saw it until I started watching his show, and he would play it constantly. Like before I even met Michael. Like I think like majority of
I saw him
time I ever saw it.
Oh fuck! All right. Before we do the clip for the Patreon bonus episode, just a couple of other quick things. First, so we are about halfway through March. So in just about 6 weeks, my new book comes out. So that's Canceling Comedians While the World Burns, a critique of the contemporary left. You can get it from Red Emma's. So you can pre-order it. It comes out on May 1st. So that's Red Emma's, like Emma, like Emma Goldman, redemmas.org. Canceling Comedians While the World Burns, Critique of the Contemporary Left, out on May Day. Second thing that should plug while I'm thinking about it is starting about a month before that, so in a little over 2 weeks, you can take classes from me or from a bunch of other people at Michael Albert's School of Social and Cultural Change. That is, we should get the anyway. Okay. Later on, we should edit those graphics so the URLs are in these, but it's SSCC, so for School for Social and Cultural Change, sscc.teachable.com. Albert himself is teaching a couple of classes. Noam Chomsky is teaching a class. They're like something like 12 people, but I'm doing one called Logic for Left-Wing Debaters and Activists. That's in April and May. It's an 8-week class. Online class at the School for Social and Cultural Change. So just want to make sure I said that. And then finally, before we show the clip, we'll do a little preview now, and then we'll run another preview on Thursday like usual. But if you want to, if you want the full episode, of course, for $5 a month, you can become a patron at patreon.com/Ben Burgess. And you get the weekly bonus episode on Thursday. You get regularly access to the Discord. You get regularly scheduled at least once a month Discord office hours, group voice chats. You get we always unlock these pretty soon. I think by the end of the month, but you certainly get early access to the monthly Sopranos bonus episode with Big Waz and Nando Vila and Mike Racine. And then, we're also starting the monthly, Discord movie nights. So if you possibly can, please do that. It's, support what we're doing here, keep it going. But with all of that said, having shilled all the things that need to be shilled, let's watch the preview. So this is the patron bonus episode for this week. It's a beginner's guide to Kant, part 2 with Russ Sabriglia, Matt McManus, and Ryan Lake. Kant jokes?
I can't think of any.
We both know it was coming.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So, last time, we were really focused on the metaphysics, and we did a little bit of the free will stuff then, which is kind of the most obvious link between the metaphysics and the ethics. But I want to transition into the ethics today. So I guess one way to do that would be to kind of keeping on the free will through line would be to talk about what Kant thinks about autonomy and heteronomy and all of that, because that's going to then get to then that's going to get to his view about moral worth, which will come up when we actually do the categorical imperative. So, Ryan, you want to get us started on that?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess the very basic sense of autonomy for a person is truly autonomous if they are self-governing. So if their actions are truly their own, actions that are guided by their own reason, actions that are for ends that they themselves have chosen, then actions are heteronomous if they're driven by something external to them or something external to their reason. So driven by impulses or driven by external influences or under the control of other people. Yes, that's the basic distinction between those two.
Yeah. So and this is this where he takes this is a little counterintuitive, even though that initial explanation sounds like, oh yeah, okay, I get what he means by that, right? It's you're acting autonomously if you're acting on ends you chose for yourself. You're acting heteronomously, which is just otherwise than autonomously. If you're acting on ends that come from outside of yourself, so far so good. But where it gets confusing is that you would think that you might think that, okay, so this me we're just acting autonomously on ends that we each sort of decide to give ourselves, based on whatever happens to matter to us. But that's like almost the opposite of what he means.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So,
I was going to say, like, the way I interpret this is the groundwork to the metaphysics of morals, which is his major work in moral philosophy, even though he seems to have thought that the critique of practical reason and the metaphysics of morals were more important, right? This is the one that everyone remembers. I think it's a very confusing book in a lot of ways, but confusing in an interesting way, a very productive way. Because as Derek Parfit pointed out in On What Matters, you'd be hard pressed to find another 80 pages in philosophy that have been as wildly influential, right? And everyone has their own thoughts on even sections of this book, and they emphasize different parts to it. I tend to think it's a confusing book, and because Kant tends to insist that everything in it fits together in a systematic fashion, right? We all know Kant loves his systems because he's a German philosopher, right? And so it's all got to fit together seamlessly somehow. I don't actually think that it does, right? I think that a lot of the stuff in the book exists in tension with one another, or at least doesn't necessitate other components of a system. The two things that I tend to take away from it are the stuff about autonomy, and I think that there's two main ways that he formulates it. One is at the beginning of the book, where he stresses this idea that the only thing that can have intrinsic worth in the world is the goodwill, right? The autonomous will to do your duty. And I think the second point where he really foregrounds this emphasis on autonomy is in the second formulation of the categorical imperative, right? The formula for being an end in itself, as it's sometimes called, right? That you must always act in such a way to treat your humanity, both in others and in yourself, never as a means, but always as an end, right? A lot of the other stuff that people emphasize when it comes to this book and Kantian morality is its rule-oriented form, which is expressed in the first iteration of the categorical imperative, which we can talk about, right? I'm not sure that has any intrinsic connection to autonomy, except in the sense that you're supposed to be a rule giver for yourself, right?
Yeah.
And I do understand why he might think that there's a connection there, but I'm not convinced that it's as technically necessary as he stresses.
Yeah, I mean, he wants to insist that they're the same, like these have exactly the same upshots. I mean, one way you could argue for the connection is it seems like you can derive the second formulation from the first formulation, because you arguably couldn't have a universal, consistent rule in favor of treating people as mere means to an end. So you can maybe derive the second rule from the first rule, but it's not entirely clear that they are the same
but it doesn't
rule.
seem like you could derive the
first rule
from the second. And it also seems like the first one is going to. So since this is a beginner's guide, right? Just to back up. So the first formulation. There are other ones, the Kingdom of Ends and whatever, but like the two best known formulations are you should only act on that maxim that you will be a universal law. Could is important. This is not like people, this is not rule utilitarianism. Watch the Philosophy Friday things we did about that. It's not that, it's not like only act on that maxim that you'd want to be a universal law or would have good consequences if it were a universal law. It's only act on that maxim you could be a universal law, meaning that it would be inconsistent. Maybe that it would be intrinsically inconsistent, but certainly that it would be inconsistent with your purposes and act in that way for it to be a universally practiced rule. And when you're sort of, and then the second one, which was mentioned, is the which Matt mentioned earlier, was always treat humanity, whether in yourself or in another, as an end in itself and not merely as a means to an end. So don't treat people as merely as means to an end.
As one of my friends put it, Emily, don't be an asshole to others.
Yeah. So, and the same way there's the could confusion with the first one. I think that an easy thing to miss the first time you hear about the second one is the merely a means to an end. But it's totally fine to treat other people as means to an end, right? When I bought this cup of coffee, right? I was treating the barista as a means to an end of getting coffee, and that's okay. And even in a advanced communist society where you didn't have money or whatever, like, like you'd still, every time you ask somebody to help you move your couch, right, you're treating them as a means to an end. It would be lunacy to think that was morally wrong, and Kant doesn't think that, right? He thinks it's wrong to treat people merely as means to an end.
Yeah.
So, do you want to jump in on that, Russ?
Well, yeah, I mean, Matt and Ryan both made important points, and I think like just start with Ryan when he said, it's the universal element of the first articulation of the categorical imperative.
Mm-hmm.
Act so that your action can serve or could serve as the basis for a universal maxim, even though, as Ryan was also saying, and I think Matt as well, that the question of autonomy versus heteronomy, right? Like there's this tension in Kant. I think Kant doesn't necessarily think that it's in tension, but reading Kant, between the subjective, which we think of as purely individualistic, and the universal, right? So Kant's ethics is this strange ethics of the subjective universal, because the law is supposed to be, the moral law is supposed to be, freely given and decided upon by the subject, him or herself. But in order for it to be the moral law, it has to have a universal applicability or a universal function. And so there was another thing as well. I forget if it was Matt or Ryan, but Kant's, I think I mentioned this last time, the fancy term for what Kantian ethics is deontology, which basically is the fancy term for duty. It's a duty-based ethics. And what's interesting, and I tend to focus on this element of it more, probably because being a student of Zizek's, like I can't think of Kant divorced from psychoanalysis. Like somebody like Freud, I think it's in his book Beyond the Pleasure Principle, I mean, explicitly links the Freudian notion of the categorical imperative of duty to the psychoanalytic concept of the superego. And the superego is like the moral agency that gives the ego the law. And it feels, it doesn't feel like you have a lot of freedom when you're being bombarded with this imperative from the superego. You could say, okay, well, superego is an internalization of the law, but still. And so I don't want to go too, I know this is beginner's guide, I don't want to go too far out and delve into psychoanalysis, but I think what's interesting about that is that the notion of freedom is very tricky in Kant, because if it is the duty, if you determine that it is your duty to do something that that brings pain to yourself, for instance, the ethical act, like doing the good, often involves harm or pain to oneself in order to help others, or this notion of the good, that actually when you conform to the moral law, and no one else tells you what the moral law is in Kant. Like the subject is radically free to decide what that is, but you often feel as though you have no other choice.
It's a very strange notion of autonomy. It's like if you do anything other than choose anything other than the categorical imperative, you're no longer autonomous.
All right. So again, if you want the full discussion, that's the Beginner's Guide to Kant, part 2, which is going to be episode 41, coming out this Thursday for patrons. Then go head over to patreon.com/Ben Burgess. But meanwhile, it's a abrupt transition, I know, but we want to come back down to earth. And talk about a little bit of real world politics with somebody who I always really enjoy talking to. I'm really happy to have her on this show finally. So Nomiki Konst from the Majority Report and the Nomiki Show. So Nomiki, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm as great as one can be. This much closer to getting a vaccine. So nice. I can walk outside and get some fresh air.
Yeah, that sounds good. I was on the phone with the hospital around here trying to figure out when I could at least sign up for it, and they right now they are not making it easy to figure out.
I've noticed it depends on the state, which is not a surprise, but you know, there's certain exceptions. For me, it's like I am around a lot of people and my parents and caregiving and all that kind of stuff. So there might be an end as long as I can keep, you know, the older people around me safe. So
Fair
we'll
enough.
see. We'll see by May, you know, they say.
Yeah, can go out and like see other human beings, and you know have yeah, that sounds really, really, really nice. I mean, we are
Not being afraid of people coughing on you.
Yeah.
That's what I'm just annoyed by all the like the anti-maskers. And I was on a flight and I had to fly for our job, and I got on this flight and all these people had masks on, and then they decided to take them off. This is like 2 weeks ago. And they kept making announcements and they kept going up to people, but there's a point where there's like 50 people without a mask on, or they're just pulling it down. Yeah, that's why you get the vaccine.
Yeah, no, I mean that is incredibly like let's put it this way. I'm equally annoyed by the people who won't wear a mask, and by the fact that like it's taking this long. We can't just like all get vaccinated so we can go back to interacting in normal ways and not having to like have like all this like treat it like it's a zombie movie, and it's like, oh crap, they're getting too close, like I have to protect myself.
Are you getting that thing where you're watching a movie? I'm sorry.
No, I feel like I'm the last person that's going to end up getting a vaccine in the whole country, because like I feel like all the boxes that need to be checked in New York, I fall short of all of them. Like, you know what I mean? Like too young to get a vaccine, working at home as a podcast producer, like this is every possible category. I'm just like, nope, that's not me.
I've noticed that like I'm watching movies now and I'm like, why are they so close? What are they doing? Why are they breathing each other? Don't touch them.
Yeah, I know, right? You get nervous even, you're so used to thinking about this stuff that, like, oh my God, it's like Tony is just like sitting there at the bottom bing. Nobody's social distancing,
Inside?
Hey, did those strippers get vaccinated? Tony, get away from them.
Exactly.
Tony was a Trump supporter. You know it.
Yeah, well, I think they did establish. There's an episode where Carmela mentions voting for Bush, I think. So,
and Tony says Dick Cheney for president of the motherfucking universe, because Dick Cheney gave him so. There's one episode where he's like, they say something, and he's like, I'll put it to you this way. He's like, Dick Cheney for president of the universe.
Oh my God. That's so much.
Yeah, he's not a good guy. That's what I got out of that. So since I know you've done a lot about this subject, and I, cards on the table, know essentially nothing about it. So you can educate me. Forrest, you want to show the Puerto Rico clip?
Yeah.
Oh man. Oh, this woman.
That's the reason we demand and deserve statehood for Puerto Rico now. The islands overwhelmingly voted for statehood in 2012 by a margin of 61%. And in June of last year, 97% of the island voted again for statehood. That's the request that brought me here.
We hear pleas of equality from our fellow Americans back on the island, and we must recognize that a majority has asked us for statehood, and we must respect it. So today we act. Today we introduce the Puerto Rico Statehood Admissions Act. Today it establishes a framework for admission, including a presidential proclamation upon its passage, a ratification vote, the election of U.S. senators and representatives, and the continuity of laws, government, and obligations.
We like to say Americans, we're all created equal, but some of us are more equal than others. And it's time to make sure that all of those Americans in Puerto Rico have the same representation, the same ability to fight for what is better and what is best in Washington, D.C., as all of us in other states enjoy.
Mr. Speaker, I had the privilege of last Sunday to be an observer in Puerto Rico for the plebiscite and watch the people of Puerto Rico make the decision they'd like to be the 51st state.
Having said all this, even though I personally favor statehood, it's not my place to substitute my views for the views of the people of Puerto Rico. If they wished to remain a territory or to become a nation, I would honor that wish. However, the majority of voters have chosen statehood, and so I intend to respect that choice.
The people of Puerto Rico have spoken. The majority of the Puerto Rican electorate voted for statehood. And when the people have spoken, we in Congress have an obligation to legislate what the people voted for. That is democracy. That is self-determination. That is decolonization. Legislating the will of the people is what we do in a democratic society. A wise person once said, if you don't have a seat at the table, then you're probably on the menu. Statehood means a seat at the table for Puerto Rico. It means more resources and more representation. It means 2 U.S. senators and 5 members of Congress. It means billions of dollars in new funding for healthcare and social services and food and all the necessities of life. A statehood would bring legal equality to Puerto Rico.
And I'm also for Puerto Rican statehood, which is also long overdue. And you know, and one of it's like a statement I make is that if Puerto Ricans looked like Swedes, they would have been Americans a long time ago.
Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez is, of course, arguably maybe the most prominent Puerto Rican member of Congress because she's not supportive outright of statehood in the same way that you are, and her bill does call for self-determination. I'm curious if you think that hurts your movement at all to achieve statehood.
Well, I would love to have her support, and I don't rule out convincing her to join me in the way that I'm approaching this. What I anticipate is that there'll be considerable support for a statehood bill in this Congress.
All right, so that is some very widespread support. Sounds pretty straightforward. Why is this more complicated than we'd think from that?
Because I love that their numbers are like 97% of the island vote. That's bullshit. Okay, so first off, if these were such important votes that they've had many times on the island, then they would be deemed verified by places like the UN, and they haven't. And part of that is the vote that happened in 2020, just this last year, for instance, was a vote in which there were only 2 options, and I'll get to that in a second why that's important. 2 options: are you for statehood? Are you against statehood? In which just about half the island voted, literally turned out and voted. Now, to make things more complicated, the island. Everything is based in what the island's status is. The political system of the island, all business is conducted in Spanish. Let's just start with that. It's conducted in Spanish. People on the island, and I'm only speaking based on my reporting. I will never, ever, ever speak on behalf of any Puerto Rican. I want to make that very, very, very clear. It's really just based on having worked there extensively over the last 3 years, working on a documentary there as we speak. Not there right now, but as we speak, working on a documentary. Everything is rooted in what is the status of the island since America invaded and Spain basically pulled out their colonial power over the island, and we became the power. There has never been an option for the Puerto Ricans on the island to determine what they should be or could be. There's a long legacy of horrifying actions by the U.S. government that lingers in the bones and the essence and the soul of every Puerto Rican on the island and off the island. Understanding what the connection between the U.S. government is, the colonial power, and the island's power. Start with this. You have a legislative body in Puerto Rico, just like everywhere else. And you have a governor in Puerto Rico, and they set the budget and they set the laws. But guess what? It doesn't matter what they set because there is an appointed fiscal oversight board that is connected to hedge funds in New York City and in Boston, who can determine whatever they want, overrule, and decide where the island's finances go. And so while people who live on the island, Puerto Ricans who live on the island, natives, will spend 70% of their tax dollars on paying the debt, which is, pretty much imposed by the U.S. government and Wall Street, you have billionaires and millionaires moving to the island and paying zero taxes and buying up all the distressed properties pre-Maria, post-Maria. And of course, that money's not going anywhere. So, there are incentives. The statehood party, now there are several parties on the island. There's two major parties. There's another growing new party. And then there's the independence movement, which was pretty much killed, from the 20s into the late 60s. But it's had its strongest turnout this last cycle. Mm-hmm. The two major parties, the Commonwealth Party and the Statehood Party, have always been the two major parties. And the Commonwealth is sort of like, we're okay with what's going on, the status. The independents obviously want to be independent. And this new movement is like, we don't want to even talk about status. We just want to talk about the issues of the island, which, is questionable. Right. But the Statehood Party has always been traditionally conservative. They have voted against, I have a list here. Let me just go through some of the things the Statehood Party. First off, pro-statehood was part of the National Republican Party. It was on the platform of the National Republican Party since George H.W. Bush, the first George Bush. They have voted against LGBTQ issues. They've voted against the protection of natural reserves. They voted against the first openly LGBTQ member of the Puerto Rican Supreme Court. They are passionately against gender equity and equity related to sexual orientation. They voted against a bill to prohibit conversion therapy. I mean, we're talking religious right. Right. Yet they've partnered up, and this is, of course, I'm glad you mentioned this. Jennifer Gonzalez is the resident commissioner, who's the non-voting congressperson in Congress who presented this bill. She was, I believe, chair of Latinos for Trump. So when you see good, well-meaning liberals on MSNBC or people like Robert Reich call for statehood, first off, it's not up to you to decide. And second, do a little research. The parties on the island are not Democrat versus Republican. It's much more complicated. And sometimes those parties will align with different parties on the mainland because of their own interests. And, the most recent reflection would be that the Democratic National Committee, through an undemocratic process, I might add, voted to have statehood as the official platform, on the official platform, the DNC. But the DNC members from the island, there was actually a coup there, and those DNC members are now statehooders when previously they were not. So that's just a brief summary overview.
So there's a second bill, I guess, that AOC is putting out, and
Nydia Velázquez.
Okay. So what is the AOC one isn't a statehood one. So what is the AOC one?
So the Nydia Velázquez, that's important because she's been a longtime proponent of this. And the Nydia Velázquez, and who's from New York, and the AOC bill is called the Puerto Rico Self-Determination Act, which is going to be reintroduced, I believe, this week. And it basically states that after 123 years, Puerto Rico has been in a colony of the United States, and it's the Biden-Harris administration has promised to give equal or fair, what's the best way of saying this? A fair process. And essentially this act would create a process, create a convention, I guess is the best way of saying it, to create an inclusive and binding path to self-determination. It's a little processy, but it involves many Puerto Rican activist groups, diaspora groups, people from the island, and in the States, because there's a very large diaspora movement in the States. I think it's over 2 million people at this point, probably even more after Maria. It's hard to calculate. And, their whole take is, if we're going to do this, we need to do this fairly. And we need to have all parties at the table, not just statehood and their, contrived polls and, doing press conferences. And, they spent, I think, a couple dozen $1 million recently in lobbying. I wish I had the number off the top of my head. In lobbying Washington lawmakers like Richie Torres, who represents the Bronx.
So in this context, self-determination would mean independence, or what does this mean?
It means that the different parties come together and they create a process to determining what that is. They have a convention, they debate, they have representatives from each side, the Commonwealth side, the independent side, this new movement party. It's not, I don't know how to translate in English, but the new movement party, I should say, and the statehood party. And they all have a seat at the table to discuss what are the pros and cons. Perfect example is in that press conference with Jennifer Gonzalez, a reporter asked, okay, if the US becomes a state, would the debt be eliminated? And she goes, didn't even hesitate. No, not at all. So what is the point of becoming a state if you're not gonna?
Well, that's the reason that so many politicians probably do support statehood. I guess is kind of a point I wanted to make, was because that means that they control the debt at that point. You know what I mean? Like the whole issue of representation, like it sounds good when politicians are like, oh, they can be represented, but they're represented plus another 50 states. You know what I mean? So at that point, like, it's basically that the federal government has captured the debt to the point where they can now, like, Congress can vote together and then say, well, you had your chance to argue against the debt and we voted against it, and that's a fair process. And
I mean, that's such a bizarre idea that you could have a state of the United States that owes a debt,
many states do. Like many states owe debts for various reasons that they've loaned money from the government, but Puerto Rico's is just so like the PROMESA Act was so.
But given the size and given that it's something that originates when they're not a state, that still seems like a very weird idea. So I mean, I guess like the obvious reason to support it would just be, okay, we shouldn't have colonies. So you shouldn't have something be a United, be semi part of the United States, but without voting representation, and so that means either being an independent country or being a state, and if statehood is what people want, then that's what should happen. But it sounded like earlier you were saying that if you take a closer look, it's not actually so clear that statehood is what most people in Puerto Rico want.
Oh, not at all. Not at all. With that being said, there's this assumption from mainland Democrats, uppercase Democrats, uppercase D, that, if Puerto Rico is a state, then we'll get 2 senators and maybe like 4 Congress members and we'll have like a majority. That's BS. If you look at the current resident commissioner who represents the entire island is a Republican, a Trump Republican, not a Mitt Romney Republican, a Trumpian Republican. Pedro Luis, the guy who's the governor now. While he identifies as Democrat, he's a stateholder, so he's more conservative on the island. The past governor, Ricky Seuss, he was a stateholder, and his father was the governor as well, partly responsible for many of the financial issues that the island has inherited. And then before that, you had, a more traditional Democrat. And then before that, you had a Republican. And then you had another Republican. So it's for the most part, the island, I think with the exception, maybe 2 or 3, for the last, 25 years, it's been Republicans. And so you're probably going to get a Republican as your senator. And some of that is not because the island is more conservative. It's because there's just been this really toxic, predatory political system. There are a lot of states in this country. I think you look at Wisconsin. Would anybody say Wisconsin's really that conservative? Probably not. But gerrymandering, Koch brothers, money flowing in, those are the conditions that create these dynamics. And what we saw in this last election was that the independence movement, which is more to the left, probably more socialist, did better than they've ever done since the FBI basically tried to kill them all and imprison them and literally radiate them. So, it's interesting to see how these movements take effect. And just to put this in perspective, DSA, Center for Popular Democracy, the Open Society Foundation, and many Puerto Rican diaspora groups have supported Velasquez and AOC's bill. The more traditional left is aligned with that bill.
Yeah. So you said that that this vote that they kept referring to in those clips was 2 options. So it was statehood, it was status quo. Although I still didn't quite get how we were going from 52% and change in that vote to the 97%.
I looked at that. I still don't understand that either.
Okay.
Thank you. I didn't get it either.
The plebiscite, like the vote that they had, the question was literally, should Puerto Rico be immediately admitted into the union as a state? That was the question. Yeah.
That was it.
And that was like 52% for, and whatever, 47% and change against. Like I just want to make sure I was reading that right, because I don't understand where that like I was really confused by the 97% figure earlier, and then suddenly it's it's 52%, then suddenly it's 97%. I mean that's a big gap.
Well, she's the Latinos for Trump lady. She makes up her own facts as she goes along. You know what I mean? Like.
She might be pulling it from a previous vote, which was also not recognized because of these clever little. It reminds me a lot of actually Cuomo. Cuomo will like pull these numbers together, and you're like, "Wait, what is that actually based on?" And it's like, "Well, my controlled mechanism to vote." I mean, it's and again, it's not like Democrat versus Republican. Commonwealthers have their own. I mean, and there's diversity within these parties. Within the parties as well. So it's.
So I do want to talk about Cuomo in a minute, but just you said that because this seems like on the face of it, this is like a really weird thing. You said that that these are votes that are taking place in the United States territory that like aren't recognized by the UN and stuff like that. I mean that's like what's going on like with these votes.
Well, they're also not recognized by the United States. That's why they had to put it in this bill and use it as like their their research. It's like they went to a think tank, a right-leaning think tank, and that was the stats that they brought to the table that they cite when they put forward their bill. It's not, it's not like they're going to the US government and saying, "See, this is our accurate." It's a gimmick.
Okay, so just before we move on, like, I mean, I understand that the idea that Puerto Rican statehood, would like work out well for Democrats and badly for Republicans doesn't necessarily make sense given the realities, on the ground. But as far as what would be good for, for people in Puerto Rico, that. Obviously not forgiving the debt is a huge problem, but like but some of the points made at the end of that reel of clips, right, do seem right. If you're being ultimately ruled over by an entity where you don't have voting registration, that's not going to go well for you. So I could still see somebody watching all of this and thinking, okay, fair enough, but like still, right, statehood. Still statehood sounds better than not, for people in Puerto Rico. So why not? Or what do you think?
That's a great point. There was a Supreme Court ruling, I think in 1987. I know I'm going to get corrected on this. I apologize. Which basically eliminated the rights. So, for instance, Social Security benefits, great example. Before 1987, this had nothing to do with whether or not they were a state or not. Puerto Ricans had the rights that you and I, all of us, have together by living on the mainland. But a Supreme Court ruling, which was essentially pretty white supremacist, it was based on another ruling that was extremely white supremacist, eliminated the rights of Puerto Rican citizens, U.S. citizens, to have the same benefits that all of us have on the mainland. And that had nothing to do with statehood. That just had to do with a really messed up Supreme Court ruling. And so sometimes you hear statehooders say, well, then we'll get the same benefits. And, the Jones Act could be eliminated. Sure. But that's not dependent on whether or not you're admitted as a state. That has to do with whether or not, you can overrule the Supreme Court ruling, which, there's a big movement to do so.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right. Let's move back to the mainland and talk about Cuomo because I know we have we have limited time and I want to make sure that we do that tonight. So do we have the non-apology and then
technically Puerto Rico is the sixth borough, so it's connected.
Fair enough.
I want to address the recent allegations that have been made against me. As you probably know, the Attorney General is doing an independent review, and I will fully cooperate with that review. Now, the lawyers say I shouldn't say anything when you have a pending review until that review is over. I understand that. I'm a lawyer too. But I want New Yorkers to hear from me directly on this. First, I fully support a woman's right to come forward. And I think it should be encouraged in every way. I now understand that I acted in a way that made people feel uncomfortable. It was unintentional, and I truly and deeply apologize for it. I feel awful about it, and frankly, I am embarrassed by it, and that's not easy to say, but that's the truth. But this is what I want you to know, and I want you to know this from me directly. I never touched anyone inappropriately. I never touched anyone inappropriately. I never knew at the time that I was making anyone feel uncomfortable. I never knew at the time I was making anyone feel uncomfortable. And I certainly never, ever meant to offend anyone or hurt anyone or cause anyone any pain. That is the last thing I would ever want to do. I ask the people of this state to wait for the facts from the Attorney General's report before forming an opinion. Get the facts, please, before forming an opinion. And the Attorney General is doing that review. I will fully cooperate with it, and then you will have the facts. And make a decision when you know the facts. I also want you to know that I have learned from what has been an incredibly difficult situation for me as well as other people. And I've learned an important lesson. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for whatever pain I caused anyone. I never intended it. And I will be the better for this experience.
There are facts, and then there are opinions. And I've always separated the two. When I do briefings, I put out the facts, and then I offer my opinions. But they are two different concepts. Politicians who don't know a single fact, but yet form a conclusion and an opinion, are, in my opinion, reckless and dangerous. The people of New York should not have confidence in a politician who takes a position without knowing any facts or substance. That, my friends, is politics at its worst. Politicians take positions for all sorts of reasons, including political expediency and bowing to pressure. But people know the difference between playing politics, bowing to cancel culture, and the truth. People know the difference between playing politics, bowing to cancel culture, and the truth.
Before we get Nomiki's reaction, I just want you to officially confirm, Forrest, you were not playing that on 0.5 speed. Like for some reason when he talks about this, he just slows it down to that point.
I also promise you I didn't cut the things twice. Like he said all of those things twice.
That's very Cuomo. Very Cuomo.
And he slows it down further the second time.
It's like the guy in the scene in Goodfellas where they give everybody his nicknames, whatever it is, Joey 2 times.
Yeah.
Hey, stop with the Italian references. Don't you know all these attacks? All these attacks. It's because there's an anti-Italian. Oh my God, that's literally what came out today. Was that you're discriminating against Italian sons of governors who control the state budgets for a decade and who have brothers on CNN and whose ex-wife was a Kennedy and. May I go on?
No, yeah. I mean, he's clearly a very powerless and vulnerable person.
Very
Italian rights are human rights. You got the right to just grab people and kiss them on both cheeks, and I don't know. It's just
yeah, right.
Listen, I'm a Greek. I feel like actually, 23. I'm 23% Italian, so I have the right to say this. Okay, they occupied our islands. I can speak on their behalf.
Hey, I'm 50% Italian, and you're not living up to my lived experience here as an Italian man living in New York.
No, I mean, I assume that's just. I mean, yeah. I mean, COVID must have been rough for you, Forrest. Because like you must like.
I can't
celebrate Columbus Day. They're going after Columbus now. What's next?
Worst episode of The Sopranos. I can't even watch that one.
Yeah,
all the way through. But
it has some great moments. I like Christopher being confused about whether Gary Cooper was gay at the end. But
I use the it's Italian discrimination react screenshot all the time on everything.
Yeah, so I like the fact that Cuomo and his defenders are playing both sides of the street at this point, and whatever. I mean, obviously,
it's amazing.
As gross as everything that all of this is about it's not exactly the worst thing he's done, right? I mean, he did also kill a whole bunch of people in nursing homes. That's not worth.
Those are facts. Those are technically he didn't kill. Let's be clear. Like I'm going to be the journalist hat for a second. I don't throw him a bone that often, but he didn't kill the people in the nursing homes.
Sure.
He covered up the numbers in which pretty much it was happening everywhere, like whether you could change it or not. I mean, maybe he did because he moved them from hospitals to these nursing homes. I mean, yes, there is a case to be made there, but
Well, now he's going to kill everyone in nursing homes.
At the very least, to have one last Sopranos reference, it's the thing he was when Carmela asks what happened to Richie Aprile, and Tony says, after this many years of marriage, don't make me make you an accessory after the fact. At the very least, is an accessory after the fact.
I thought you were going to say it's a retirement community. They're not included in the nursing home numbers.
Exactly.
I am so happy I rewatched The Sopranos from start to finish in like March of last year. So I'm getting all these references.
Nice.
I have the Cuomo died in a nursing home, died in a hospital. Who cares? Clip that we played when Emma was on, but
oh my God.
Yeah,
have you seen that one?
Ruthless. No, I didn't. There was a time in my life, if I can be clear, I was obsessed with Cuomo. I read every book on him, pretty much every article. He's a fascinating study in I mean, I actually think he's an extremely skilled politician. His Achilles heel is he hates people.
A year ago, New York women are coronavirus crushing on Andrew Cuomo.
Yeah. He is single, guys. Just want you to know. Well, my only thing is
that wasn't clear in all this.
What I don't understand is why couldn't he have called it one of these women who was like hiring publicists to have like profiles of them in the New York Post, Long Island, like literally he could have just called one of those women up and he had to go to his staffers, which, remember he was an attorney general and he investigated these things, as he said.
Well, because with Cuomo, I feel like it's all about power. It's all about what can he do? Like, what can he do with that power? And it's never anything to benefit people, besides the people around him and himself. So, it makes perfect sense that Cuomo would have just grabbed somebody and kissed them that was under him on the, I guess, the hierarchical structure of politics.
So to defend this, he's trying both things impressively. So on the one hand, he's having people run this. Anti-Italian discrimination. I saw somebody today actually compared it to Emmett Till.
Oh my God, what on earth?
Yeah. So he's running the woke defense, but he also says in that last clip that it's that this is cancel culture, which is awesome, because I think this is like a general, like, that, you know, that even Cuomo has latched onto this, because like this is something that's like struck me lately as a little weird, you know, that it's like as recently as last summer when there was all the endless discourse about the Harper's letter, like it seemed like 95% of the time when people used the phrase cancel culture, I knew what they were talking about. They were talking about like online pile-ons and, you know, getting people fired and stuff like that. And now it really feels like in the last couple of months, it's been brought in to the point where people are using it to talk about like Dr. Seuss and shit like that, and like I just have no idea what they mean anymore.
I wish you had saved that for the transition to the other clip where.
Please don't tell me I have to debate Dr. Seuss again. I've done it like 6 times last week.
Yeah.
Every time on cable news they call you like, and by the way, we're talking about Dr. Seuss. I'm like, oh,
yeah.
I'll be sitting on my deathbed looking back and saying, could I have saved, you know, what could I have done with those 5 hours of my life instead of talking about
You
Dr.
killed all the Who's down in Whoville. All the ones on that flower that was.
Yeah, right. Like it's yeah, right. Whatever. So you are most definitely not going to be asked to debate the actual Dr. Seuss issue, because I think that you know, I think the official GTAA position is there's something, you know, I'm in no shade on you. I mean, it's what they asked you to come on to talk about, but like, I think the official show position is there's something deeply wrong with anybody who spent more than 90 seconds thinking about the Dr. Seuss thing.
I'll co-sign that position.
I'll co-sign it, and I did. So, well, the best part is when I went on air to talk about it last week. I don't know. I came up with some spin about it. I can't, like, you guys are too focused on cancel culture when you're not focused on, you know, you whatever. Your definitions of cancel culture all over the place. And then the Republican was like, actually, I want to talk about education. Can we talk about how public school? Why aren't we talking about why schools aren't being funded right now? I'm like, what is going on here? I was like, yes, let's talk about it. We basically
let's talk about that. Jesus. So it's not the actual issue, but I do want you to play that clip for us.
Oh, right now?
Yeah.
Sure.
Did Cuomo decide to change the subject on talk about Dr. Seuss?
No. I mean, you know, Cuomo, I think that, yeah, I mean, if there's some, again, like I'm cautiously optimistic that this means that Cuomo is on his way out, because it seems like he's reached the point where he's throwing everything against the wall that he can possibly think of. Right. You know, it's cancel culture, it's anti-Italian lynching, you know, whatever he could think of, and you know, whatever. I mean, I'll even say on the cancel culture thing, like I find this frustrating because as someone who actually does think that online pile-ons and, you know, and sort of hair trigger firings and stuff are a real problem that the left should take seriously, like, you know, using this thing that like as a label for that to talk about like every single petty culture war complaint that has absolutely nothing to do with that seems super unhelpful. But yeah, you were saying.
And just one little note that is important to keep in mind here. In 2 weeks, the budget's due from him. Right. And so there's a lot of like in New York, this is when everyone's like, well, what's going on in New York? I'm like, well, there's what's going on, and then there's what's going on. So what's the subtext here? And the subtext here is, you know, they're about to go into budget negotiations. He's probably trying to leverage that. I mean, if he does have to step down, which, you know, in my mind, it was like if Biden says to step down, he's going to have to step down. I mean, that would happen behind closed doors probably. But Biden has said, like, let the investigation play out, which signals that that's not going to happen anytime soon. And Hillary probably won't step up. And those are the only two people I can think that could publicly push him in that direction. But if there were a situation in which he did have to step down, I mean, the state would be in utter chaos with a budget that is looming. And it's always a toxic time in Albany. You have the IDC, which is out. Now you have an actual Democratic Senate that is, you know, just angry at him. He has no friends. No political friends, like, at all. I wasn't surprised Gillibrand came out against him. I'll just leave it there. So it would, with the budget crisis that we're dealing with in New York, with economic crisis, with Cuomo out, I don't know. I mean, maybe the delaying the process, which might inevitably still lead to him stepping down, might be smarter. And I can't believe I'm saying that because he's a pain in the ass to deal with when it comes to the budget. But like the alternative is Kathy Hochul inherits a seat and suddenly has to maneuver this in a matter of weeks. I mean, I don't have an opinion on either one, but we do have to think about this.
I have kind of a not theory, but like there's kind of a thing about Cuomo being used almost as like a sacrificial lamb to the Democrats' coronavirus response, because it came out that Gretchen Whitmer or whatever, they're doing a similar like a inquiry into her handling of nursing home deaths, and it seems like a lot of the heroes that the Democrats have kind of constructed around this coronavirus response in terms of governors are starting to fall. So it seems like if Democrats kind of wanted to flee from Cuomo, like the harassment allegations would be a perfect time to do it instead of like a further investigation into the way that nursing home deaths were handled. I mean, kind of that's like because it seems like they jumped ship so fast. You know what I mean? Like, and part of that is obviously that, they no longer, if they support Cuomo, might not have like the moral high ground in their mind, like when it comes to harassment allegations. But the other thing is that, it works better for them, I feel like, to have Cuomo go down for this and not for like nursing home deaths, and like not have the media examine their own role in propping him up for the last year, not have like all of these things would kind of completely demolish the line about like the Democrats being the more responsible party on coronavirus.
Right. And the referendum on Gavin Newsom too. I mean, Warren and Sanders came out and said that they didn't support the referendum. So it's interesting.
Yeah. No, that's a little. I love. I love Bernie, and there's a conversation to be had about how much of this even tactically makes sense or not. I'll certainly say for my own satisfaction, I wish that you were much less of a team player about stuff like this, but of course. Obviously, we want to spend the next 3 hours talking about Dr. Seuss. So, Forrest, let's roll that clip.
Mr. Ryan.
Consent, Mr. Speaker, to enter a letter into the record from the Machinists Union.
Without objection, and now the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, one of the earlier speakers said, this is the most dramatic change in labor law in 80 years. And I say, thank God. In the late 70s, a CEO made 35 times the worker. Today, it's 300 to 400 times the worker. And our friends on the other side running around with their hair on fire. Heaven forbid we pass something that's going to help the damn workers in the United States of America. Heaven forbid we tilt the balance that has been going in the wrong direction for 50 years. We talk about pensions, you complain. We talk about the minimum wage increase, you complain. We talk about giving them the right to organize, you complain. But if we were passing a tax cut here, you'd be all getting in line to vote yes for it. Now stop talking about Dr. Seuss and start working with us on behalf of the American workers. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back.
Credit where credit's due. It's a good line. So let's talk about the PRO Act.
I don't know how often I've cheered on Tim Ryan, but
I know, right? but calling balls and strikes here, and that one.
Well, he's a union. I mean, like he has a lot of flaws. He's kind of an establishment Democrat, but he has lined up in support of labor stuff because unions kind of take up a large percentage of his constituency. So he's an interesting figure because when it comes to stuff like Medicare for All, he's never going to support that. But when it comes to something like the PRO Act, like since unions are such a big part of his base, he has to.
Right. Exactly. I strangely enough, 5 or 6 years ago, I went to a fundraiser in the Greek community, and they were supporting him. And I mentioned him Greek, and the people who were there hosting the fundraiser were they did something with construction, but they only worked with union contracts, and that's why they supported him. And that's how I learned all about his union background, because I never thought that. Then he challenged Nancy Pelosi, and he's clearly hungry, and he's running for Senate. So,
yeah.
But the PRO Act, yeah.
Yeah. So why is this? Okay. Actually, so there are really two questions here, right? So one is there actually any chance of this passing the Senate? And the second is, why would it be so important if it did?
I mean, I think it's on us to make sure that it passes in the Senate, and I think we control the Senate now, so if the pressure can be put on Joe Manchin, and I mean, especially Joe Manchin because of the labor force in his state, and people like Kyrsten Sinema, who lives in a right-to-work state, and this would reverse right-to-work states. I mean, the ability for a state to be right-to-work. That's transformative in itself, and she absolutely must know what is acutely aware of how labor, which is very loosely organized in Arizona, has been able to organize around issues related to education. I mean, they just passed a tax the rich bill to fund education. This last cycle was huge, or not bill. It was on the ballot. It was a ballot measure. So, I mean, I think it's very doable. I think the coalitions behind it, I work with an organization called Matriarch, and we're big supporters of the PRO Act, specifically because we're backing working class women, many of whom have a labor background aligned with unions, coming from unions, because we think that's the pathway to winning, across the country, and making sure that if somebody runs as a progressive, they stay as a progressive. That's kind of how it works. If you're part of a union, you're most likely going to stand for those issues. So we're very excited about the bill. I know there are a lot of different organizations out there putting a lot of pressure. I think there's a real chance. I think, it's stalled in the Senate for a while, but the moment is different. The makeup is different. The hunger is different. And just frankly, the country is going to be in a very rough situation if we do not have a strength in labor. And this is an incredibly strong bill. It reverses labor laws of the last, anti-labor laws of the last, 40, 50 years. So I think it's the strongest since Taft-Hartley, if I'm correct. But it would be transformative. What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I want to, because I think that some people might, sort of vaguely get, okay, this is a good thing. It's a pro-union thing, but they might not get quite why this would be such a big deal if it happens. So what are the kinds of things that this is rolling back?
So people who are striking, employees that are striking, can no longer be replaced in the midst of a strike. I mentioned that there would be an end of right to work. States couldn't be right to work anymore. Let me think what else. Secondary strikes would be legal again. Let me see. You could extend when like Amazon, for instance, you could have shorter voting processes, where right now Amazon's voting process is like it's like a month long. And they're spending a ton of money and using all these tricks to pressure workers not to vote in favor of unionizing in Alabama. I believe that the federal arbiters are able to impose the terms of a labor contract, which was not a thing before. Let me see. What am I forgetting here? Did I forget anything else, guys?
The Amazon thing is pretty interesting, because as we see like Jeff Bezos having resigned from Amazon, I feel like a big part of the reason why he resigned is so that the Washington Post can start writing articles because they released an article that's supposedly fair and balanced about where they just admitted that Amazon sees unionization as a threat to its ability. They hold on, somewhere in this article they say that it seeds of unionization could blossom into organizing drives at other facilities and force Amazon to adopt workplace rules that finds restrictive. And they talked to a former, an off the record, quote unquote, executive that's like, oh, well, things are pretty good for workers here, and we'd really prefer they not unionize, and we think a unionization drive across our company would not be a good thing for us. But it seems like Jeff Bezos kind of resigns, and then just as this vote happens, and then all of a sudden, establishment media is willing to just kind of write it off. They're like, well, Washington Post is owned by him, but he's no longer in charge of Amazon. And they put a disclaimer that he's he runs that newspaper. So it's
honestly, I think Jeff Bezos is no longer in charge of Amazon in about the same sense that halfway through Casino, A. Thrusting was no longer in charge.
Well, he's still their biggest shareholder. Like,
right.
You change your job title every now and again.
Yeah.
But,
he's their biggest shareholder. But so like I'm just saying, like the depths of how a company like Amazon can fight against unionization. Like, you know what I mean? Like they control the press at that point. Like they control what their workers do, literally to the point, as we were talking about earlier, what they're controlling their workers' movements. Like, that level of control has to be ceded at some point, or the balance is so far gone that, like, you know what I mean, like a labor movement can't spring back up. And I feel like the PRO Act is a great stopping point for that, to get some power back.
I mean, there is the worry that Sean Richmond brought up when he was on the show, that it wouldn't survive a Supreme Court challenge. Certainly not with with this Supreme Court.
Yeah.
But by the time it gets to that point, how many things could be, how much could happen? I mean, I'm not one to say, I'm not a labor lawyer. So
no, but I mean, that's definitely got to be the hope, right? That, like, if there's some good organizing that happens, in between now and then, that could start to change the dynamic, even if the Supreme Court then takes it all away again. Really hope so. Thank you so much.
Marco Rubio will get us there, because he's in favor of the Amazon workers now. So just make him the spokesperson.
I'm tired of all these woke bosses coming in here telling workers, you can't buy books that are anti-trans anymore. Just, you know what? I'm in support of all unions now.
Amazon banned it. Screw that guy.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about the Marco Rubio op-ed earlier, which really, like I know, like really, like they seemed less like he was supporting the union than like he was going to send a message to other companies, like, this is, hey, if you piss me off on culture war issues and donate to Democrats, then I'm not going to defend you like I normally would when an insanely profitable corporation is facing a unionization effort. But
amazing.
It is awesome. I mean, like, I think that if you buy Little Marco as an economic populist, I think you'd buy anything. But thank you so much, Nomiki. Where can people find you?
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Forrest. You can check me out at the Nomiki Show. It's on YouTube. Nomiki Konst. No, wait. Oh, God, I ruined it. The Nomiki Show. Just the Nomiki Show. It's on YouTube. It's on Twitch. And you can also find me on Patreon. That's how we pay our bills. So definitely join us on Patreon if you can. We have a book club that we launched in January, and we're in the middle of Capital is Dead. Is This Something Worse? It's a great book. Our podcast with Mackenzie Work will be up, I believe, this week. So you can go check that out, Patreon as well. And I'm also on the Majority Report on Tuesdays tomorrow. That's tomorrow. And if you want to support Matriarch, which I mentioned before, go check out matriarchpac.com. Matriarch is doing a bunch of trainings this cycle to support working class women, especially with a labor background, run for Congress next cycle. So we get a bunch of Cori Bush's in, who was one of our founding members. So go check them out as well. I think that's all of my things, at least at the top of my head.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, Nomiki.
Thank you.
All right. We are going to take an intermission for like 45 seconds, and then we are going to be back with two excellent Radical Teachers Union activists, Paul Prescod and Kenzo Shibata. So really excited for that conversation in just a minute. All right. I am now joined by Paul Prescod and Kenzo Shibata. How you guys doing?
Doing all right.
Good. Glad
Got
to
my
be here.
first cab, so I'm a little tired, but extremely happy.
Yeah. And tired of Forrest, surely, at this point. You know, this is you've seen a lot of him lately.
We're common law now. You
We had a really fun
together.
We had a really fun show on Meet the Left yesterday. We talked about like a whole bunch of stuff, and I don't know. It was an all producer show. So.
Fair enough. So yeah, why don't you, Kenzo, people who might not be familiar with who you are and what you do, you want to introduce yourself?
Cool. Yeah, I'm well, primarily, I'm a high school teacher. I teach civics and English in the Chicago public schools, and at night, I do a show called the Kenzo Shibata Show. It's a podcast over at patreon.com/myname. And then also every Sunday we do Meet the Left, which is a panel show. 3 leftists, Forrest and Paul have been on it. Ben's going to be on it in a couple of weeks. It's going to be a lot of fun. And it's kind of like a Sunday morning talk show, except we do it at night and everyone's a socialist, at least.
Fair enough. Other than that, exactly the same. How about you, Paul?
So similar to Kenzo, yeah, my day job is a public school teacher. I teach social studies 9th and 10th grade in the Philadelphia School District. Proud member of my union, Philadelphia Federation of Teachers, and I co-host the Jackman Show, which airs on YouTube on Wednesdays.
And I edit the clips for.
Right. There you go.
Yeah.
Very incestuous, but whatever.
Yeah, it's one of the 20 shows that Forrest is producer for.
Right.
Yeah. Fair enough. Well, do we have the ventilation clip?
Yeah.
So
this was wild when Paul played it on.
I was wondering if this is the one. Yeah.
Yeah.
The Philadelphia School District is installing window ventilation fans in school buildings as part of their COVID safety plan. The district released this video today. Students will begin to return to in-person learning on February 22nd. Now, some parents and teachers have complained about this ventilation strategy, arguing it is insufficient.
To say the least.
Arguing.
Don't even have
right.
I mean, they cracked a window, so I mean, like,
right.
I don't know what else more you want from them.
Yeah,
air moves around, and then the corona.
Right. He's got to blow the COVID
end up
around.
Anywhere.
Right. What's amazing is that, yeah, I mean, I would show that, or I think I put it on Facebook, and people that are not in the school district of Philadelphia or don't know what's going on were like, "That's a meme, right?" Like I posted a picture. I'm like, "There's no way that's a real thing." And this was their 3rd time attempting to send us back to in person. So we were thinking, surely this time around they would have like a really fleshed out plan that we cannot poke any holes in. I mean,
their plan was literally they're going to crack a window. And say
right. So yeah.
Well, isn't it The Wire or something that when that one detective becomes a school teacher in Baltimore, they say, listen, like make sure the windows are closed so the students get tired, and therefore you can teach.
Oh, right.
So maybe cracking a window is a special occasion in a city school.
Well, the problem is like the CDC put out guidelines, and then our city also put out guidelines. And had our buildings not been 100 to 200 years old in Chicago, maybe they would work. But like when the rubber hit the road, like our windows don't stay open in a lot of schools, and we're not given like dowels or anything to hold them open. So sometimes you prop them open with like textbooks from the 1970s. I'm not kidding. We've done that before. And then, we are in this period in Chicago right now where like today we had a blizzard. The weekend, it was like the spring, it was 60 degrees. So like sometimes those windows are frozen shut, and other days, you can open them. Sometimes they're raining right in. Like they didn't assess the actual like conditions on the ground before they issued these reports.
Right. And I think a lot of people just don't understand that, I mean, I don't want to speak for Kenzo, but I don't think any teacher is going to sit here and claim virtual learning is as good as in person. So, and we want to go back as well, but people don't realize, they don't understand the magnitude of the conditions that have been deteriorating after decades of austerity, if they're not kind of living in those areas.
No, I mean, look, clearly nobody's going to make that claim. I mean, I teach college students who are, adults who are there of their own free will, and virtual learning isn't
Right.
like anything like the same as being in a classroom. I can just imagine, the K-12 versions. But this is also like, one, you really do have to ask how well people learn if they're rationally worried about getting the plague. And two, I mean, there are competing priorities here, to put it mildly. And this is such like a weird like insult to everybody's intelligence. It's like, oh,
Right.
well, the window. What do you want? There's a window. It's, it's clearly that takes care of it. I remember actually Kenzo seeing the CTU, the Chicago Teachers Union Twitter account, posted a little while ago a picture about how the district was saying, it's okay, just open a window so there's some ventilation, it'll be fine. And you could see that literally the window was snowed shut at that point, So that's obviously pretty extreme, but it also seems like if they're suggesting stuff like this, like if they think that they can get away with that as the entire response, then they're not very worried right now about being able to force teachers back to the classroom.
Yeah, and I think, I don't actually have a national lay of the land, but I'm just imagining there's probably many places without unions that are as strong that have been forced back. Imagine how many places have been. I feel pretty fortunate in my union. I mean, I'll admit it's not as strong as CTU in many ways, but we were at least able to stop like some of the worst of this. But I imagine in many places they haven't been able to.
One place that I thought was really interesting was Cicero, which is a western suburb, not a wealthy one either, pretty working class area. And their union, they basically copied the campaign that CTU was doing to stay distance. The big difference, though, is that they have an elected school board. So, like, if you're a teacher, if you're a parent, you go grocery shopping at the same grocery stores that the people on your school board do. You can pressure them and you can say like, hey, I'm not going to make your life easy if you do something I don't like. And so the difference in just the power dynamic than Chicago, they were actually able to win, and they're continuing to do distance learning. In fact, that went to court for them, and the judge determined that the judge would not issue an injunction because what they were doing was not a job action, because they were still insisting upon teaching just via distance. So it's just interesting how you leave Chicago, which has a completely different set of education policies, and the same kind of campaign can be more effective.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that because you sent me that article that you the interview that they did with you at one point, where you're talking about I guess the school board, or the lack of a school board in Chicago, because the mayor's office was given pretty much the ability to place in their own CEO, who basically just answers to, in this case, Lori Lightfoot. And I was wondering if you could break that down, kind of like how that came to pass, and I guess under which mayor, and how it's caused problems for teachers unions.
So this is such an interesting history, because if you ever want to look at how Democrats and Republicans have worked together to gut the private sector or the public sector, this is it. In 95, this was right at the heels of the big Republican takeover of national politics, the contract with America, Newt Gingrich and all that. That also impacted state legislatures. So for the first time in a long time, Chicago had a Republican state legislature. And they also had a new mayor in Daley Jr., who took over after Harold Washington, who was a populist, grassroots organized campaign. And then the neoliberal reaction to that was Mayor Daley Jr. winning. And he had a very close relationship with Republicans in the state, because they all had very similar goals. Mayor Daley Jr. being a neoliberal, he was part of these civic associations, so like the business community shaping policy locally. So he rubbed shoulders with Republicans just as much as he did Democrats. And he was able to convince them in 95 to give him total control of the schools. So he got to appoint the entire school board, meaning we don't have a school board The mayor of Chicago pulls the levers on the decisions they make. And it also, in the same year, they were able to gut our bargaining rights specifically just in Chicago, where we can only strike, or we can only strike over wages and benefits. So what that does is it makes it hard for us to like go on strike for class sizes, which is something the public would always support us on. And, you know, it was very intentional to make us look very greedy over the years every time we tried to fight for more.
And the head of the school board that he appoints is literally, I think, in what I was reading, called the CEO, right? Like,
yes, and that's important.
As if it's a corporation.
Part of that is, you know, branding and everything. But what that meant was a superintendent has to have a state license to be a superintendent. The CEO does not. So they changed the law specifically to appoint this guy, Paul Vallis, they've sent him all around Connecticut, all around the country to privatize shit. I think he was in Philly for a while, right, Paul?
Yeah, I think with the School Reform Commission, which was our state takeover of our school board, which we did get rid of recently, but it's mayoral appointed still.
So yeah, Paul Vallis, and then Arnie Duncan, who was, you know, the neoliberal beast, who was able to force a bunch of education reform, you know, corporate reforms down people's throats with this Race to the Top initiative, which was kind of an overreach of the federal government under Obama. And, you know, all of these things are connected. You know, Obama and Duncan going to the White House from Chicago, where they made their bones with people like David Axelrod.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, don't really have a sense of how hostile the Obama administration was to teachers unions.
And so, like, that led to pretty much every problem we've had in Chicago, every strike we've had in the past, 10 years, is the fact that our school board is not accountable to anyone but the mayor, and we have a fucked up electoral system here. So the mayor isn't necessarily someone who has the will of the people, but has all the power and authority.
And then skip ahead, I guess, to Lori Lightfoot, who's like kind of one of the first people that doesn't come out of that political machine. Like even Rahm Emanuel obviously like has the connections to Obama and the Daley family. So you know, just the fact that her CEO is going to be different than the Daley family CEO, but it still is the same goal, I think, is what you were kind of trying to say.
Yeah, and the interesting thing so we've been complaining for years. I mean, we want to have an elected school board to make the choice of who the super should be. But part of what our messaging was, which may have been a mistake, was that we want an educator at the board. Well, we got one, but it's, you know, a member of the professional managerial class, Janice Jackson, who is not there supporting teachers and not there advocating for us. She, you know, you would think it would be great to have a classroom teacher at the helm saying like, oh, and when I was in the classroom, X, Y, and Z things were problems. She was very resistant to any common sense reform we had at the bargaining table a year and a half ago too. It was like negotiating with someone who was not even a teacher or never had that experience. So, you know, we have an educator at the helm, but she's not a popularly elected or supported one. So she has, you know, carte blanche to make all sorts of awful decisions on behalf of the mayor.
Then the amazing quote from the interview with Lightfoot in the New York Times, where she's like, I mean, what's wrong with these teachers? It's like they want to run the school district.
Actually,
they want to run the city. They want political influence. What's wrong with that? Yeah. Right.
She said, let me put it in context of labor across the city. We have relationships with 40 organized labor unions. She goes, like, she does that. And then she goes, they ask, what do you think their motivations are? She goes, I'm not going to speculate about what their motivations are, but I don't believe that's correct. I mean, if you look at their spending, there's a real clear indication of what their larger ambitions are. And then she says, ultimately, they'd like to take over not only Chicago public schools, but take over running the city government. That'll play itself out over time. I don't really spend time, and certainly not in the middle of a pandemic, worrying about the politics. But politics intrudes always.
I love this. First of all, I love when politicians try to be like, I don't do politics.
Yeah.
You know? I know I'm the elected mayor of a major U.S. city, but like, I don't understand why politics is involved with what I do.
Yeah, well, we were just talking about that with Cuomo. Cuomo going like, playing politics is the big problem with everybody coming out against his sexual harassment allegation.
But yeah, Lightfoot, I mean, it's just like, I mean, what are these peasants thinking that they can influence politics, you know?
Anything bad is politics. Anything good is their, genius.
Yeah, and they have, and also, of course, the thing that jumped out at me about that was the labor peace, right?
Mhm.
We have labor peace, with all the rest of these, it's just not these damn teachers. So which really ties into the politics thing, because it's like both of those are different ways of saying that people won't just shut up and do what they're told.
Right. And also, I mean, the attempt, as you see there, it's like, the police union and the firefighters union, they cooperate. But these other public sectors don't. And, Scott Walker actually did a very similar thing when he attacked the public sector unions in Wisconsin back in 2011. He actually was pretty smart about playing off certain unions were the good ones, and he wasn't going to attack the firefighters and some others, but he attacked the others with classic divide and conquer.
The way I could describe Lori Lightfoot's relationship to the Fraternal Order of Police is similar to Barack Obama's relationship with Netanyahu, where like she gives the police everything. She gave them a fat budget. She gave them a bunch of our CARES Act money. She gave us school budget money in the form of school resource officers. And yet they hate her guts and they talk so much crap about her, and they have their own police blogs where they call her Groot and just like dress her down. And yet she like cannot she just cannot help them out enough. And they know like they don't have to be nice to her, because the meaner they are to her, the more she'll get. And it's a relationship she'll never win. And the teachers here were, kind of like the Palestinians, I guess.
Well, we were talking yesterday on Meet the Left about I asked you about her as a police accountability person in the Rahm Emanuel, like her role as that, because after the Laquan McDonald or that murder happened on the street, she kind of was the person they put in charge of the police accountability hearings, right?
Yeah, it was one of those, it's like we talk about how like the PMC, like they aren't there to advocate for the people, they're there to advocate for the bosses or whoever's in power. And that accountability board was, on paper was there for the people to have some sort of say in the, in policing. And really it was her being a mouthpiece for the police, telling the public why the police are okay and why, certain things they did were defensible. And like, that should have been enough for us not to elect her.
Yeah. So I want to get back to the school issue. I mean, we kind of heard like a little bit about where things stand in Chicago. So Paul, I mean, like what's the state of this right now in Philadelphia?
Yeah, I mean, so back on, we were slated to return February 8th, and our union, we had a big day of action that day. Oh, well, K-2 teachers were slated to return, and we had a big day of action. And, sometimes the classic quote, "The best organizer is a bad boss." And if there's anything good that came out of it, that day of action was, the most solidarity we've seen in the union in a while. And, many people were participating in their first picket line, their first union action. So we were able to stave off reopening then. They have since, basically they've determined certain buildings are cleared for opening, like they've done ventilation tests and are claiming they're okay. And those schools have to be approved by our union's environmental scientists. So, I mean, some people are, it's not perfect that some are starting to go back. So K-2 schools, a lot of them are opening now. And again, it's only for students that have signed up, and many haven't. I mean, that's the other part of this. Many are still choosing not to. And also some people are not realizing quite what this means with a hybrid plan. Like, students are going to be in a classroom still with a computer. We still can't exchange like papers and stuff. And it's still going to be a very limited education while they're in person. But so K-2 schools are starting to open up. It's unclear at this point whether middle and high school will. I mean, at this point, it's getting towards the end of the school year. I mean, at this point, it seems pointless.
Right.
So it is, I mean, to be honest, it's kind of up in the air in Philly right now whether beyond K-2 will be opened. But the other thing I'll say, it'd be very rational for some people to be like, why are they trying to do this? Why are they pushing us back? And I do think part of it is just a power play, and especially in Philly, gearing up for our contract fight. Our contract expires in August. I kind of see this as like the first round of that fight. And again, if there's anything that's good, I think it is starting to galvanize our members just to get in the practice of fighting back. And I think this is going to be a tough contract fight. So that's kind of part of what I think Lightfoot alluded to in that interview, is that this is like a broader political fight. It's not really just about opening schools. It's about being able to force teachers to do what they want us to do.
Because I mean, like it's really hard to claim that it's that, you know, that it's really about education, that it's that important to force people back for like 6 weeks or something at the end of the year.
Right. Yeah. So again, it's unclear. You know, if I had to bet right now, I still would bet that high school would not be going back by the end of the year. But I mean, as you see with the fans thing, like can never underestimate what our district will do. That makes no sense whatsoever. So
Are there safeguards for the schools that do go back if numbers like spring back up?
And the union negotiated a MOU, or memorandum of understanding. It's kind of like a temporary special contract that does stipulate about, you know, testing regularly and like what happens if a case breaks out. And again, there are certain schools where like some rooms are deemed unsafe for people to be in because they test the ventilation levels. So again, there are some good protections in place. And like, I can't stress enough, you know, in this process, when this all started a year ago, you know, like even an imperfect union like mine is, my union has not been taken over by a caucus like in Chicago, but even in a perfect union, like how crucial unions are for like basic safety and stability, like to be able to know last school year, you know, like we would be working from home and we had like a few weeks just off of school, like to know that my pay is guaranteed and like there is some check in place. It's just like, I can't express how much difference that just makes in your overall well-being. And just like one more example of how important unions, even imperfect unions, are.
For us, I think it really is a testament to how hard the capitalists really wanted to open up the schools. It was bipartisan, as much as, you know, both parties don't really want to admit it. You know, the Republicans wanted it to happen. They couldn't make it happen. And it looks like with Biden in office, you know, his first 100 days, one of his promises was reopening all the schools. Whether or not that was safe doesn't matter. It was just, you know, it was one of his campaign promises. So he's going to follow through with it. And he's going to allow the, you know, Democratic governors and mayors to put the screws to people for it. And so the situation with us was immediately at the beginning of the year, they wanted to open up the schools. And the CTU, at that point, all we had to do was call for a meeting to discuss a vote on whether or not to strike. And then they rescinded and the board said, okay, we can teach distance. And that went on for quite some time. And then it was just an ongoing anti-CTU, anti-teacher, you know, campaign from there on out. Like the mayor really wanted to make it clear she felt that our advocacy for distance learning was because we were lazy, which is bullshit. It's like I'm working 12, 14-hour days, you know, re-gearing all my old lessons for distance. Like it's more work and I hate it, but I also don't want to get COVID. And so it became just a back and forth. And we almost struck again. Had we not fought so hard and actually organized and prepared for a strike, we wouldn't have gotten anything. And we ended up getting an agreement out of this, which was far from perfect, but without it, we wouldn't have had any safeguards really in place in the classrooms. None of it would have been grievable. Is a big issue, is that now, you know, if something is violated, we actually have some teeth to an agreement. And unfortunately, like we couldn't get everything for people who have like immunocompromised partners at home or family, but those folks can now take unpaid leave of absence and, you know, have a job and have their health care. So we didn't get everything we deserved, but it was just because the other side was fighting so hard and, you know, insisting things like before Lori Lightfoot said that to the New York Times, she said at the negotiating table, you know, I think you're just trying to take over city government. Like it really kind of animated their side in negotiations. The idea of like, how dare you? Like we're the experts in the room. You know, we're the ones that are going to do this. And we're like, no, we're the ones who are in the classrooms every day. And we understand how none of these things are going to work. And, you know, mandating masks on pre-K students, some with special needs, it's going to be very difficult. So even though, you know, we're slowly folding in now, right now, it's just pre-K through 8, and citywide clinicians, people like social workers. And after spring break, which is in 2 weeks, they'll talk about high school teachers, I have a feeling even just out of spite, the mayor might send high school teachers back within those last 2 months of the school year.
Yeah, which goes back to to Paul's point about how it seems like more of a show of power than anything else. It's hard to see what anybody else thinks they're getting out of that, especially under the circumstances. I also wanted Kenzo to go back to something Paul sort of mentioned in passing, and that I think probably a lot of people who are watching this know what he's talking about, but I'm guessing not everybody does. Which is why the CTU is as good a union as it is right now, and what the history is there.
Yeah. So it starts back in like maybe 2008. The Chicago Public Schools was under this program called Renaissance 2010, which started in 2004. And the idea there, it was another one of those great press releases where the Chicago Public Schools was going to open up 100 brand new schools, small schools, which right there is false messaging. Small schools does not mean small class sizes. What this meant was they would close down some schools and then reopen 3 schools within a school. And 2/3 of the new schools they would bring in would be non-union. So it was pretty blatant union busting that the CTU at that time, under our old leadership, they were just not prepared or even really interested in fighting. And so a bunch of teachers got together and we decided that we wanted to stop these school closings, which were so dangerous. Like schools would close that were hubs of the community. Students would have to, for the first time in their lives, cross gang lines to go to their new schools, and kids were getting, beaten and killed. Even there, Darion Albert was a student who got murdered because of these programs, and like I can name a few more. And so this program was getting very little pushback, and so like this kind of militant group of leftist, and not even just leftist, but also just militant teachers in the union came together, and we started having book groups. We read Naomi Klein's Shock Doctrine, and that gave us a good framework for how the school system is built on this neoliberal model. We looked at New Orleans as a case study, and saw Paul Vallis, who was there too, and all that he did. And we saw that it wasn't a conspiracy, it was a plan. And the plan had actors, it had people involved in it. And a lot of these people were controlling our schools. So we became almost like a shadow union. We came up with the name CORE, the Caucus of Rank and File Educators, and slowly just started organizing. Our first big win was we won 2 people to our pension board, which is kind of a lower stakes election than the union office election, but it was one where it was like our trial balloon to see how well we organized, and where we needed to kind of beef up our field operation. And then in 2010, we did not expect to, but we won union leadership, and that was the year that Karen Lewis, rest in peace, became the president of the Chicago Teachers Union, and that it was a big struggle for the first few years. The first couple of years, the media and just influential people in the public wanted to say we were a fluke, we were a freak show that just won by accident. They hurled insults at our leadership, but then we showed that like we were making connections with communities, with the community orgs, with parents, with local school councils, which are like these mini school boards that are actually elected in individual schools. And because of that, we led a successful strike in 2012, the first strike in 25 years. It was a year into Rahm Emanuel's first term as mayor, pissed him off. That was when he, I think, realized that he always hated us, but at that point he saw us, I think, as a formidable opponent. And it energized the entire city, and other orgs started blossoming from there.
I have a clip of Karen Lewis on Democracy Now.
Yeah, let's do it.
The day the strike ended, pretty much talking about what they achieved with it.
terms of salary, what did you achieve?
Well, we fought off merit pay, which was something that they were absolutely adamant about. They wanted to take away our lanes, which are for achievement of advanced degrees. They wanted to take away our steps, which are for experience. And it's the way we've been doing things traditionally for some time. They wanted to replace that with some sort of merit pay piece. Or as they call it, differentiated compensation that were tied to evaluations. And we were adamantly against that. And for a variety of reasons. And that took an awful lot of wrangling. So in terms of that, austerity contract compared to what we had before. But at least we were able to maintain this. And when we argued about it, they said, well, we're giving you your lanes and steps. And I said, but you need to understand, we had never lost them. So that was something in your mind that you are giving. And I think that's problematic. We also got a right to recall in schools that where enrollment drops. If that enrollment comes back up, if they projected incorrectly, then we got the right to recall, which we've never had, by the way. So in many districts, when things like this happen, the right to recall is no big deal, but now we actually have it. So there are small things. We got an anti-bullying measurement, an article. And one of the issues about that is that our members have been so miserable in schools. We've had a lot of problems with principals changing people's programs in order to set them up for failure. It's like I know of a nationally board certified teacher in science who taught 7th and 8th grade science, and she was given a kindergarten class. This is like an inappropriate, there's no pedagogical reason for this. So these are the kinds of things that were going on in Chicago that were really driving people to easily decide to make a decision to strike. The problem is he has the wrong idea of what this union is. Now, that may be so for other unions, but we purposely tried to change the culture of union so that the union is about education, is about empowering teachers and paraprofessionals and clinicians. And as a result, the union officers took pay cuts, significant pay cuts, so that we could have an organizing department, so that we could have a research department, so that we didn't do the union the way the old union was done, because those days are over, because then people like Bruce Rauner can separate the union from the teachers. And this is where they're wrong. They're absolutely wrong. And they acted that way the entire time because they didn't understand what we were really doing, which was organizing our members, not about the whole, yes, we have to negotiate for whatever, but that's not our main focus. So our main focus is trying to make education better, because we feel like we can solve some of the problems. The longer school day was a hot, buttery mess until we sat down with them and said, okay, look, you can't afford to pay us this entire length of day because the arbitrator told you that. So here's a way to figure this out by staffing up so that you can save some money. We actually brought that to the board because they were clueless. They were absolutely clueless in trying to figure out the problem. We're teachers. We're problem solvers. And for Bruce Rauner has to remember, I'm 2 years out of the classroom. So for me, not a bureaucratic union hack. Sorry, that tag just won't hang on them.
First of all,
rest in peace.
I know I was going to say, what a figure Karen Lewis was. Yeah.
Definitely.
I love that. We're teachers, we're problem solvers line at the end of it.
Yeah. And that was prescient too. Like Bruce Rauner became our mayor 3 years after this, after she gave that speech. Like she saw where power was and like was able to isolate it. And like I could never have asked for a better political mentor than her.
Yeah, so she was the head of the Chicago Teachers Union until 2014. She passed away last month. Since we live in an unjust universe, Rahm Emanuel is still alive,
right.
but Karen Lewis is dead. Which, yeah,
I was going to say too. I can't overstate like how important that 2014 or 2012
strike was 2012. Yeah,
2012 Chicago's teacher strike was, and like just to tell a little story, that strike happened, and probably one of the only things productive coming out of Occupy Philly was we formed this labor working group. At the time, I was in a socialist organization called Solidarity that had a few people who were, intimately involved in Chicago teacher strike as rank and file members. And we, organized for a few Chicago teachers to come to Philly and speak to an audience of Philly teachers and basically say, this is what was going on. This is how we did this. And that was the birth of our caucus, the Caucus of Working Educators. And I think that is what inspired the UCOR network, the United Caucus of Rank and File Educators. So, I mean, I know Chicago teacher strike is mentioned a lot on the left, and as it should be, like it really just like was a catalyst for so many things. Like I'm not sure you would have the Los Angeles teacher strike of 2019 if you didn't have the CTU strike first.
The cool thing about that too is that in 2009, before we took power, we actually went out to UTLA and met with because they had like a mixed leadership of like some radicals and some old guard folks. And like we sat and they taught us lessons. And then we took those lessons and we, won leadership. And then after we had a few years in, like we were giving them lessons back. So it's just so important to have these kind of networks together because no one's going to teach us how to fight the bosses, really.
Right. And what's really cool is then now you go to the Red for Ed and West Virginia, for example, which I don't think it's 100% accurate to say that strike was spontaneous, but it was more spontaneous than CTU, let's say. And, coming out of that, even though I think you could say that was a success, like they actually didn't really have a structure in place. And now like those people that led that strike are part of this UCOR network, which is United Caucus of Rank and File Educators, a national network of, teacher caucuses and activists. And now they're kind of learning how to implement this structure to kind of have a more sustainable structure in West Virginia to try and consolidate these gains. So, that network is invaluable.
Yeah, that makes sense. Before I let you guys go, I think it's a little bit of a shift from what we were talking about, but I know there's one last thing Forrest wanted to ask you guys about.
Oh, I wanted to talk about like there's a clip for it. We don't have to watch it. I don't know. I know that Paul's talked about this before, like a just transition. If we're going to pass a Green New Deal or something like that, like labor obviously is going to be on one side of that, and I mean environmentalists are going to be on the other side of that, unless there's some kind of just transition where union jobs are protected. And I just wanted to hear Paul's thoughts on that and how that could be done.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say this because Wednesday on the Jackman Show, we're actually going to have a guest to talk right about this. And I mean, a great model for how they've started to do this is in New York, and unions came together. A lot of the building trades, which I think is the key element here, but not just them, came together and I hammered out basically a vision document that was very concrete and pragmatic and laid out, this is how many jobs in renewable energy you could create in New York State. And, through public transit expansion, through retrofitting buildings, through solar and wind. And, it's very practical in terms of the amount of jobs and how many. So they kind of united labor around that and started going from there. And like right now, the building trades in much of New York is like heavily bought into renewable energy. And like there's offshore wind projects that are starting that have project labor agreements signed with unions. So like that work, and there's a report that they released, the group called Climate Jobs in New York. I forget the name of the report from 2013, but the report where they lay out this vision, I think that's a model for other places. I think that's how you can get unions bought in. Because I think the challenge right now, it's not like building trades people wake up and be like, how many trees can I destroy today? Or how can I destroy the environment today? It's more like they want jobs, whether they are clean or not. So like,
yeah, it's like a right now thing. Like,
right. So the challenge is, and I think if you ask them, most of them will be like, yeah, I would like a renewable energy thing. I think so now it's just like showing them like, actually, this is real life. And in New York, and I'm sure other places, they're starting to see like, this is not just like fantasy. I'm actually working jobs in this sector. And I think that's just how you have to approach it, from like that practical thing. And actually it kind of relates to schools. Like something we're trying to initiate in Philly is like a vision for green schools. I mean, our buildings on average are like 70, 80 years old. I mean, mold, lead, asbestos, all kinds of problems. So we're wanting to like collaborate with the building trades and, retrofitting these buildings and making them non-toxic, but at the same time making them clean energy buildings. And it's a good thing also because it doesn't involve taking away anyone's job in the fossil fuel sector. And and I'm not saying eventually we do got to think about the pipelines and what to do about those jobs, but I think it's a good starting point because, it's literally a win-win for everyone except the rich who would tax to fund it, so no one's losing a job. You're only adding jobs, at least at first. I think that's a good thing to start on to get that buy-in for maybe, a tougher sell. But yeah, on Wednesday, as Kale is, we'll have Lara Skinner from the Worker Institute. And I mean, I'm excited for that because she was instrumental in kind of pulling the unions together. The building trades that everyone is saying is reactionary. Like, no, in New York, they're actually moving forward on this in a real way. So, and she's going to talk about like how that happened.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that they're reactionary.
Yeah, I know you don't.
By any stretch of the imagination, but I think it is a real thing that Biden canceled the Keystone Pipeline, and the first set of talking points is divide and conquer for people that would be working on the left. Here's an ecological issue or an environmental issue, and here's an issue with jobs. Like, don't you want people to have jobs? Right. I think it's really important to start talking about that. Otherwise, it's going to be so easy for both the capitalist class and for politicians that are running to go, yeah, well, it would be nice to save the world, they put it in individualist terms, but then be like, but you're going to take away all these jobs. I thought you guys liked jobs.
Yeah,
so
I think if you're not if you're doing it on the backs of working class people, that's how you get yellow vests. And then and it's also, I think, particularly, important to talk about because I think that this is, much like the Chicago stuff, which I always thought was like the ultimate refutation of the myth that Obama was this wonderful progressive who's just hindered by Republicans. That's like, okay, look, here's a city where you have to do some work to find any Republicans, and it's run by the guy who was essentially Obama's first-term co-president, Rahm Emanuel back then, and look at what he's doing. Right, and similarly, I think, the certainly in the we'll see what happens under Biden, but in the Obama approach to this stuff, really, I think, rationally gave people a lot of people the idea that anything that was going to be done for them in terms of jobs and transition was kind of going to be a joke, because the Obama administration approach was to sprinkle a few technology training centers in Appalachia, as they were, forcing closed coal mines, and essentially tell middle-aged, laid off coal workers learn to code.
Right. And I'm actually kind of interested how this is going to play out with Biden, because I will say, probably the only good thing at the DNC was there was a small little segment about green energy featuring an electrician union member. And often Biden does frame stuff in terms of jobs, union jobs. He kind of pairs that a lot when talking about Green New Deal, not as much as we'd like, not as consistently. And also, Jane McAlevey mentioned this, and I found it kind of interesting. So the Secretary of Labor, Marty Walsh, who was mayor of Boston, but before that, he was head of, according to Jane, a fairly progressive section of the building trades. And she's kind of wondering if someone like him, he might actually be able to facilitate buy-in from building trades on some green infrastructure in a way that others can't, because he's one of them, and Biden has kind of talked a lot about making a lot of money available for green infrastructure. Again, I'm not saying Biden's bringing social democracy, Don't worry. But I think it's kind of interesting to see if maybe someone like Marty Walsh can kind of warm up the climate for that. Oh, not literally. That I didn't mean that as a pun. But, lay the groundwork for maybe some more buy-in from the building trades. And Biden tends to sometimes do a decent job of talking about green stuff in terms of union jobs. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm. And there's going to be people like at JCPenney and other retail. Those jobs aren't coming back. Give them the tools. 6 months, you're going to become a computer coder. We'll pay for it. And you'll get millions of people to sign up for that. They are not going back to parts of the retail economy, and we need to give them a lifeline to what's the next chapter. And there's going to be...
it's like... It's like satire.
Yes.
I mean, you can't make it up. What up?
Yeah, no, exactly. That's I mean that is like a Chapo sketch of what they would say.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean,
no, it's awesome.
Well, there's always the most like, I don't know, like biggest example of something, and I feel like Rahm Emanuel fills a role as like the most cartoonish example of a sociopathic neoliberal.
Yeah, exactly. All right, thank you guys so much. Always a pleasure to talk to both of you. Paul, when is that episode you're talking about, Aaron?
Oh, that's gonna be this Wednesday at 6 o'clock, 6 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, on Jacobin YouTube channel.
All right. Thanks, Paul. Kenzo, remind people where they can check out your stuff.
Yeah, go to classtime.gg. That'll take you directly to our YouTube, where you pretty much get all the information. We're doing Meet the Left this Sunday with David Story from the Valley Labor Report, Luisa Diaz of the YU Mad Pod, and Leftist Lorax of the Left Flank Vets. So they'll be at 6 p.m. Sunday.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks,
and then
guys.
Ben will be on the following week, and the full cast isn't fully casted yet.
All right. Sounds good. Talk to you then.
All right, take care.
All right. So let us do our Biden update. Do you have the Biden update graphic?
Yeah, gotta throw that up and go. I'm gonna come up with like some kind of animation or something that that I can throw up when we're about
let's I think we need some actual music for the Biden graphic. That's not you just going boo, 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 boo.
Yeah, that's all right. Most low tech music.
Especially because all the other music on the show is so awesome.
Yeah,
that like the intro and outro and intermission music, and then somehow the Biden update is boo, 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 boo.
All right. So for our Biden update today, I wanted to go over what's in the PRO Act, because I think it's important that we can talk about it until we're blue in the face and how it needs to pass, but. If nobody knows what's in it, they're just kind of going, well, unions are important, you know what I mean, like, and not really pushing a lot of the messaging that really should be pushed. So it passed the House with 226 to 205. 5 Republicans actually broke rank to vote for it, and 1 Democrat broke ranks, Henry Queller, who almost lost a couple years ago to a progressive, but didn't, and is one of like the worst Democrats in the House. So this is kind of a fact sheet that I found about the PRO Act, and it kind of puts things into like 3 different categories. So the first thing is obviously that they're going to be able to penalize companies that violate workers' rights, which, reading this, is something that I found really amazing, how little the NLRB can actually do to companies that violate rights, even if they do come up with a ruling. So it would empower, they'd be empowered to fine companies either $50,000 for civil violations or $10,000 for ignoring a ruling, which still means that, they have to rule that they're breaking workers' rights and then come back to the NLRB, have another like case kind of, and then go, oh, well, you're not following our instructions. But still, it's, these fines are coming up for companies. They would have to immediately seek an injunction to reinstate employees that are building a case, because right now one of the things that companies can do is just kind of indefinitely keep somebody unemployed, which puts pressure on them to drop the case, because they're like, like, maybe this isn't worth it, maybe my rights were violated, but like I need a job right now, like they're bringing in other people. So it would protect a worker who decides to bring a case to the NLRB in that moment. And another thing that is amazing that the NLRB doesn't have right now, or workers don't have right now, it would it would make workers able to hear a worker's case in court if the NLRB decides not to hear it, which protects workers in a situation like another Trump administration, where they can just go, what, I don't want to hear these cases about these companies, and then they can kind of provide a bullshit reason for that. So those are important things on that line of it. It would protect union elections, and it would bring employers out of the union election process. So things like Amazon's doing right now, where you kind of have these meetings where they bring in they bring somebody in that kind of is an anti-union person to like give them a presentation about why they shouldn't unionize. Right now they can just kind of do whatever they want with that. It would also allow them to have an election. It would also allow them to have an election off premises, so they're not kind of literally intimidated by the boss or or management, just because they decide to hold this vote. They can do it, secretly, quickly, in a place that the boss doesn't see them. And another thing is that employers would have to post a list of your rights in the workplace, so they can't sneak in and make you feel intimidated about not having rights. You have to know what your rights are. And then there's the part where so they're going to protect and expand collective bargaining rights, repeal right to work. If a group of workers do decide to unionize, the free riders, that people that kind of just get those benefits without the people that get those benefits without joining a union or paying dues, which is kind of what right to work states have right now. They would have to pay dues in that situation if the company does decide to unionize and they want those benefits. It protects workers who want to strike in solidarity with other companies, which is something amazing. Again, I didn't know, but that we didn't have. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
no, yeah, the fact that you can't do sympathy strikes is absurd. And I mean, I'll give it a quick example from my own experience. For 2 years, when my wife and I were working as adjunct professors at Rutgers, I was on like the executive board of the adjuncts union, for 2 years, and there was a situation where we were even trying to bargain, like, in coordination, at least, because stupidly enough, the graduate students and the full-time professors were in one local and the adjuncts were in another, and there was like labor law being what it is. Like it wasn't entirely up to us, like we couldn't just announce like we're merging back together, like they had that, like, or at least there was some like risks to like making that request. So we were even trying to like bargain together, but then like it got to the point where the full-timers union almost went out on strike. This was like in my last semester that I was there, and people kept asking me what I would like students and stuff kept asking me like what I would do if they did, because we're not. It would actually have been illegal, for us to go out on strike in support of the full-timers.
Yeah.
So like, even in that situation where it's like a union representing essentially part-time and full-time employees doing exactly the same job, because they're two different locals, one of them can't go on strike because of issues about another. Then, I always told them that, look, I mean, whatever, we can't technically go on strike, but, Kathy Burgess didn't raise any scabs, I'm certainly not going into teaching, if this happened, but like, I could have been fired if it had come to that. And then
it gives employers and bosses like a way to break people up into these groups and then intimidate each group like separately. You know what I mean? Like your case is a perfect example of
no, exactly, yeah.
Like
and then, well, because then like when the other shoe dropped, like, so the full-timers union almost went on strike, and then they were like teetering on the edge of it, and then they ended up settling, and agreeing on a contract. And then the adjuncts hadn't agreed on a contract yet. And so what that, and they actually couldn't like stick it out, like they were legally prohibited, from, like they got to the point where it's like, look, we've run out of excuses that, that we think they'll buy, they couldn't hold out until the adjuncts contract was settled before they settled their contract. So at the end of the day, of course, the adjuncts got a way worse contract than they would have. And obviously, this is an example that is playing out among a fairly privileged layer of workers. But it gives you a sense, and it's the kind of thing that comes up all the time that like some like Teamsters might get away with like not like delivering past picket lines and stuff. But if it really came to it, like they'd be forced to, because you cannot go out on strike over issues that aren't playing out in your workplace.
Yeah.
Which so you can't go out on strike in order to support another strike. So it's literally a law against solidarity.
And it really makes it so that union things are not like union drives are not like a labor movement. It's like just individual situations, which is what you see playing out with the Marco Rubio thing, kind of bringing it back to that. Like each of these is an individual situation. We don't have to have any rulings on employers in general. We're going to take it workplace by workplace. But if the PRO Act is put in place, it's not workplace by workplace. It's entire industries now that are allowed to bargain together, because suddenly you're not just stuck in your workplace. That way. So on the same token, another thing that it protects is and then of course there's the most important one, but another smaller one is it protects intermittent strikes. So if you're striking and then you go back to work and then your boss kind of like does the same thing again, you want to go on strike right away. Like right now you're not protected in the case of strikes that are kind of like strikes that don't happen all at once. So, which is another interesting tactic that they use, because at some point, some people do have to probably go to work, and they can just kind of, they're not protected by their right to strike anymore in that sense. Which I guess brings us to the most important part of expanding collective bargaining rights is AB 5, the law that Prop 22 was passed to end, which is a California measure that suddenly all these companies like Uber, Lyft, Postmates that are trying to put workers like nationally as independent contractors, so they would be protected under the same laws as other workers if they can pass the ABC test to determine their worker status, which makes it so that all these companies can't keep just changing employment status around. So suddenly, if you try to unionize, you're not workers, you're independent contractors.
Yeah.
And that was that federal law, which Uber and Lyft and all that stuff already have a bunch of anti-union talking points ready, and they were ready to bring that out as like a national goal to get all the states to pass it, and this would end that drive right in its early days.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And this is all stuff that if it happened, would be this would be a game changer. I know I've got my internal Sean Richmond, chiding me against being too hyperbolic about this and pointing out that there are lots of obstacles, that couldn't be solved by something like this. But just in terms of the basic mechanics of at least some of the not all of them by any means, but some of the most horrendous things that like some of the most outrageously anti-worker things about American labor law, this would make a huge difference if it happened, and make workers like way bolder, on the shop floor. Because
it would make a labor movement possible. Like right now, with all of these things stopping it, like it's not even really a movement, I guess you could say. Like, it's a bunch of union drives in different places that aren't legally necessarily allowed to coordinate with each other, aren't legally allowed to set up like a collective bargaining agreement for an entire industry, which is like what the trade unions used to do of old. You know what I mean? Like, they used to be able to set up, standards for an entire industry for how people should be treated, because there were just so many unions in different places that, that they would all kind of come together to discuss that. And that's not even possible right now, let alone individual union drives.
Yeah, right. No, I think this is a big thing, although really the question, and part of what makes this the Biden update is what Nomiki gave us an optimistic read on the possibilities earlier, but there's also a pessimistic read of what's going on here, which is that this wouldn't have sailed through the House in the first place. If people didn't know that it was largely symbolic, that it wasn't gonna, that it wasn't gonna pass the Senate, which is, at a certain point, I almost wish. So there's a extremely stupid podcast host and prolific Twitter user. Let's just say her name rhymes with Shmami Sharice. And she was tweeting about how this is actually going to suppress class struggle because unions that just do that just form infrastructure for the Democratic Party, are actually like a managerial thing, and this is
class capture, right? That was her phrase that she used. It's the class capture of the
which of course is in the real world. Obviously, both Democrats like Jeff Bezos, for example, and Republican employers, fight equally hard to stop unionization drives. None of them think that this will suppress class struggle, and I'm very there is a legitimate reason to be concerned that this gets into what we've been kind of talking about every Biden update, that the Manchin and Sinema thing. I mean, it's not that it's not true that these people are going to be roadblocks to anything like this happening. I mean, that is absolutely true. But at a certain point, you wonder whether, at least in certain cases, that's like the best thing that could happen for some Democrats, because it's like that cartoon with the dog straining its leash, barking at the bigger dog, and then the leash comes off and it picks it up and brings it back to the owner. Picks up the leash and he starts straining again. That if they didn't know that they had the excuse of Manchin and Sinema, or the excuse of the filibuster, then they would be a lot less willing to vote for important progressive things.
Well, look at Pelosi's a perfect example. In the sense of she has stock in Tesla, she has stock in a lot of these, she's a Silicon Valley kind of representative. So and she literally has money in a lot of these companies that would want to change worker classification from being a worker to an independent contractor or a freelancer. So you have to wonder if she didn't think that it wouldn't pass the Senate, would she really be, voting against her own pocketbook? But at the same time, it also provides some kind of opportunity. I mean, just to take the optimistic side, I guess, when we talked about the COVID bill and the minimum wage, talked about Manchin kind of being, I think, someone that you could use the bully pulpit against. I think unions are a good example of that. I don't necessarily think it's happening right now, but if people went to West Virginia and just constantly ran Manchin anti-union ads, I think that unions are an important enough part of his constituency that maybe he would relent in a case like that. You know what I mean?
And even with a lot of people who lost jobs at coal mines are no longer at a union. The memory could still be powerful. And I mean, I don't want to
he's gained power over memory, the memory of a time when workers in West Virginia felt like Democrats were fighting for them and Democrats controlled West Virginia, which wasn't even that long ago. It was 1990. You know what I mean? As everything deindustrialized, it slipped away because, a lot of people, as I've said over and over again on the show, there are plenty of people when you just turn politics into cultural issues, there are plenty of people who are conservative, but there was a time when West Virginia was a labor hub, for unions, to the point where they could stop trains from even, delivering stuff with their unions. The unions were such a powerful force in West Virginia, and the coal mining unions, Manchin kind of has run on being the last Democrat left, and then conceded to all things conservative because he's they don't really want me to be a liberal like senator. But I don't think it's like Sinema where it's just some deeply held cynicism. I think in his case it's a man who sees his state turning blood red pretty much, that's trying to hold on to his last little bit of power. So I think he's more movable than some.
So that's interesting, and I don't want to I mean, Kristen Sinema clearly there's some sort of there's some sort of deep Epstein conspiracy blackmail thing going on there from Code Pink and the Green Party to doing the minimum wage thumbs down. But
there's actually there's a part in that interview that we watched a couple weeks ago with Kristen Sinema where later in on the thing she says, the best way to get normal moderate people in Arizona to support the things we want is to talk to them in a more moderate tone, a way they understand. And it feels like it went from that to I'm going to be the moderate person that I'm pretending to be. And that was her full capture, I think. because it's an interesting quote in there.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, in Manchin's case, I don't know. I mean, it is. I don't think that how vulnerable he is to what kind of primary challenge in West Virginia. I wouldn't want to try to pronounce on too confidently, right? Like whether that would actually work to go into West Virginia and do a massive ad blast all the time. Joe Manchin is anti-union. I mean, I don't want to pretend that I can be more sure than I am that would work, but fuck, if you don't try, right? Like if you're not at least trying to do stuff.
I don't think he's vulnerable to a primary challenge. I think he's vulnerable to a general election challenge, though, and from a Republican. And there's always going to be him walking this weird line, which it seems like he does over and over again. Like he walks this line where he's just like a Democrat enough in name, but then votes like a Republican. But I think if things turn the other way and all of a sudden there was a push for unions in West Virginia, I don't think he wouldn't suddenly be like Bernie Sanders, but I think that he is cynical enough that he would just go with whatever he thinks will keep him power. I don't think it's like an immediate thing that you could just be like, Joe Manchin's anti-union, and then he'd be like, oh no, I'm not, I'm pro-union. But I do think that there is an argument for using the bully pulpit. That's what I'll say.
No, for sure, right? And again, whether the idea would be that that would be like basically playing hardball. That if that you're running all these ads that would endanger his support come the next general election, so that even though, of course, the Republican he was running against would also, would be even more anti-union than him, it would still be, he would be worried that his base wouldn't turn out in that election. That's the idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. And again, I think that whatever, I think doing that, I think running primary challenges and how it's not that these things would definitely work. It's that if you're not waging an all-out war, to get Manchin to flip these positions or cinema to the extent that might be possible, then you've just kind of given up on accomplishing big things. And I know that the sycophantic corporate media is treating Biden as the reincarnation of FDR because he signed something that's actually in a lot of ways pretty similar to what Trump signed. The previous COVID relief bill. I mean, you could argue that in Trump's case,
in direct payments, it's even less, or unemployment, it's even less big than what Trump signed. Like Democrats were able to whittle down unemployment to half of what the original unemployment a week was, the maximum you could get.
Yeah, right, exactly. So, and there are big things like in terms of temporary relief, there are really big things in that bill. But there's no permanent, anything really in there. Something like the PRO Act, that would be a big deal. That would actually, that would actually represent, a meaningful shift. But I mean, if you're not going to do things that are clearly in a way that a bill that has creates this category of 17 million people who got a check from Biden, but not for Trump. I mean, if you're counting on that as your big improvement of ordinary people's lives to get people to vote for you in 2 years, when it would otherwise damn near be a law of nature that you would lose seats, in the midterm. I mean, that's a pretty that's a pretty weak read to hang all those hopes on.
Yeah, and then there's always another election coming up. You know what I mean? Anyone that wants to argue that the Democrats are going to lose seats, there's always another election coming up. The second somebody gets into power, they're in there for 5 seconds, then all of a sudden the argument is we're going to lose seats, so we can't do anything too big, but next time. And it's no, we're a month into Biden's administration. You know what I mean? He could do anything he fucking wants right now. And, I bet that if Biden had hit the minimum wage issue harder, he could have changed, well, not Manchin maybe, but I think Biden could have pressured at least the 2 Delaware senators to vote for it. You know what I mean? Biden didn't stand up for it. He immediately had people go out and say, well, we don't think it's going to pass the COVID relief bill. We just don't. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think that the bully pulpit is kind of an underrated thing, and you can really see what a president's ambitions are based on, you know, what they're willing to go to war for.
Yeah, no, exactly. Let's see. All right, so I think we're almost ready to cut it for tonight. We're gonna take a couple of super chat questions if we've got them. We've got one from I believe you pronounce it Calais.
Calais.
Calais. Callie Brooks, I believe that's right. So says I'm fascinated by Matt Dimick's argument in Jacobin and Catalyst that what we need are greater labor freedoms, not labor rights. Cite Sweden. What do you think? So I've not read this article, but to fill us in on the details of this, we have a last minute surprise extra guest, Cale Brooks.
God damn it. I'm holding it right now. Like, let me see if I can remember this. It's something that, okay, so just to lay something out first, Matt Dimick has put forward this argument in Catalyst and Jacobin. This was maybe a year or two ago. And it's somewhat in contrast to some of the work that Alex Gorovich has been doing, where he's been making the case that we need to revive the right to strike. And it's interesting because I've talked to Alex Gorovich about this, and he actually is also kind of similarly really interested in Dimick's argument, because it's not an obvious counter argument. It's just a different kind of argument. And what Dimick is basically saying is that when we just look at kind of a historical comparative lens, the U.S. labor movement and the Nordic labor movements, the U.S. labor movement, a lot of our progress has come through the expansion of labor law at the federal level, and most of the actual protections are won through individual contracts within specific workplaces or between a specific union with a specific employer. And again, those terms have largely been overseen or carried out by the NLRB. Whereas Dimick is saying the contrast would be to look at the Nordic countries. I believe he also uses France as another possible candidate. That's a entirely different situation. Whereas with the Nordic countries, they never had, they do not have, for instance, a minimum wage on the books. Like, there is no
like every once in a while you'll see right wingers bringing this up, that it's like, oh, hey, you guys love these Nordic countries, they don't even have a minimum wage. But of course what they're missing is that they have incredibly powerful unions that in practice enforce a higher wage floor.
Trade unions, which is what we were talking about earlier in the episode, where you have to have a labor movement that's able to bargain. They have to be able to bargain in unison, so that floor gets set up at that point.
Well, so not even just because, of course, there's trade unions all over the world. Like, what's really specific.
Oh no. Okay, Cale is frozen, but if I had to guess, probably what he was going to bring up is sectoral bargaining, which is like what you.
Am I back?
Oh, he's back. He's back.
Yay! All right.
It's like you should just stitch me in post, and I'm just Homer Simpson with the clock spinning around.
Ben was getting ready to steel man your argument, so I'm glad you came back to stand up for yourself.
I know. I caught you last minute. No, but what I was gonna say is that what the distinctive feature that Dimick is pointing out is that there's not just trade unions, but there's the trade union confederation, which it's like sectoral bargaining to its full extent, that this is the organization that represents all workers, all unions in all workplaces, and they are directly negotiating with employers. So again, his argument, so there is an argument, but just the starting point is we can just look at the actual histories of these two parts of the world, and it is in fact true that at the same time that labor law has increased workers' capacity to organize through the creation of the NLRB and the Wagner Act, it has also been severely curtailed by the same means of instituting greater, more draconian labor law. And so much of it is also both what is said and then what isn't said, that there's a certain formality that also kind of puts limitations on class struggle in a way that Swedish workers do not face those same kinds of restrictions. And so again, I think it's an interesting thing, because when we're thinking about practically, like, what is the actual programmatic demand in this moment? Like, how do we get labor, back fighting, and in a position where one win can lead to a further win? Do we, it seems pretty obvious that the PRO Act, not just because it's good in its own terms, but because it's somewhat more viable than any other option, should be pursued. And that seems like the path to go down. But there's nevertheless seems to be an unresolved conflict of, okay, so it gets rid of some of the worst aspects of Taft-Hartley, but at the same time, do we in fact want the NLRB and labor law the way it is? Is it in fact restrictive of unions pushing for greater workplace freedoms? That's how he frames it. That we want freedoms over rights. And
but then, what would the next step be in his argument? Like, you know what I mean? Because there has to be, like, it's not like you're like, all right, let's drop the whole push for the PRO Act. Let's drop the push to kind of legislate these things. Like, how would we get from here to there without empowering unions through law?
Okay, hold on. I'm literally gonna just look at the conclusion.
Yeah. Well, while you're looking it up, I was going to say, I think that one way to start to think about this kind of labor freedoms, framework, which, obviously, right, as Cale just said, situation that we're in, the PRO Act, all the stuff that should definitely be pushed for. But there is this whole other category of problems with the American framework of labor law that I think might go more directly into the labor freedoms point, which is the kind of thing that, like, Sean Richmond was talking about when he was on, like how the whole NLRB structure forces unions to suppress wildcat strikes, so that, like, when like some of the Rockettes announced they weren't going to perform for Donald Trump, the union had to issue the strongly worded thing, said no, you can't do that, right? Because they're as part of their role as as the representative of the entire workforce, that they'd get in trouble if their members did something like that. So they have this really strong legal obligation. So I don't know what exactly the legal reforms would be that would that would remedy that, or like if you even do like the stuff Richmond was suggesting, that you sort of experiment with minority unionism and things like that. But at least I think maybe if you're kind of thinking about that stuff, or you're worrying about that stuff, like that might get you a little bit more into the mindset of that labor freedom, not just labor rights view.
Right. I think that makes sense. And again, I think the driving the premise that he's that's undergirding this, basically, it is in fact like a political program of we should take this route over this other route. My understanding is that he is saying that this would lead to, like, having greater autonomy would also mean there's a greater chance of greater democratic norms and cultures internal to unions, that it does in fact spur greater rank and file efforts. And this is he had a follow-up piece that was critical definitely supportive, but also critical of the Bernie 2020 platform Up for Labor, because, you know, while of course there's obvious good things that he would support, such as sectoral bargaining in there, at the same time, it necessarily also does kind of work within the framework of, you know, we have the leadership of these unions that are in actuality fairly conservative in this moment and have been for the last few decades, and that they would be the ones leading the charge rather than trying to spur on greater militancy from the bottom up. And again, it's, you know, it's hard to say how we get out of this moment. I mean, if we knew, you know, this debate wouldn't be happening, that we'd have a much clearer sense of, well, okay, we actually know strategically we start at this point, we work here, and you know, once we get through this obstacle, we move on to the next thing. And I just don't know if we have enough, like, even just empirical evidence. And so again, that's why I find Dimmock's case so interesting to look at. Like, there really are only a few pieces of evidence, like historical trajectories in different countries, that we can examine and consider for, you know, how do we rebuild a labor movement, or in their case, initially, how do you build a labor movement from a place of structural weakness and political weakness, and again, you know, part of Dimmock's argument also is that, you know, we go the labor law route because of the way the U.S. state develops compared to the way the Swedish and other Nordic country states develop, and it's that they're later developers than the U.S., and so in some ways it necessitated more independent action. So again, that's the, you know, with the neoliberal state kind of, you know, it seems like we've hit the dead end of neoliberalism, and yet there's absolutely nothing in front of it yet. And I don't know if it's possible to actively change it, or we just gotta ride the wave through hell right now. But it's just, I don't know. I wanted to throw that in there. Just a little quick guest of, this was Ben's idea. I didn't want to come on to like make the case for Matt Dimmock, but I just find it's like one of the most interesting ways to think about labor organizing, you know, just to what extent do we even pursue labor law reform versus some other option?
Yeah. No, fair enough. Yeah, that's fascinating. So gonna have to read that. We should have
a later conversation once we both actually read that, and
all three of us have read it.
Yeah. What's all of us have read that. We'll have to have another conversation.
Yeah. No, I assumed that Kale already had read it, so I was adding us as the people that haven't yet.
I'm remembering it live.
Fair enough. Should say to Kale is the behind the scenes YouTube mastermind for Jacobin, and he's going to be back on the channel even before the labor freedoms conversation, whenever that happens. He's going to be back on the channel on April 7th, because we do, been doing this this weekly series of live streams where we talk about movies. We're actually taking this Wednesday off because it's St. Patrick's Day, I
definitely need to take this Wednesday off. Last week it was an everyday editing.
Yeah, fair enough. But normally Bhaskar keeps Kale chained to his computer on Wednesday nights, so he can't join us. But on April 7th, the Jackman show is going to be off, and he's going to join us to talk about The Shining. And now it's April 7th is actually my birthday, so I reserve the right to be genially drunk during this conversation. But I am still looking forward to that, and to talking to Kale again. Then should plug before we go on Friday for the Philosophy Friday live stream. Going to be continuing the discussion with Jennifer about the Ship of Theseus and personal identity on Sunday for the Sunday night debate breakdown live stream. That's also going to be a part 2. We're going to be doing finishing up watching Michael Albert's debate with Destiny.
Did he really stream a stream of you guys watching him?
Yes, he did. It's called somebody actually just said it to me. It's has some what's the name of this thing? It's the actual title of it. He posted it on YouTube. It's so his video of like he watched like the first hour of our stream watching this. So actually here, let me just do the quick screen share. This is the title they put on this thing. It's leftist professor brings friends on to dunk on Destiny.
Leftist professor brings friends on to dunk on Destiny. So much dunking. Very, very bad, folks.
Yeah, which I don't really think is what's going on. I mean, there was like a minute of friendly banter at the beginning about how about how it's hard to hear the name Destiny and not think that it's a stripper. But like other than that, like it's other than that, I guess the other thing people got mad about was that like Brent was one of the guests and he brought up that, Destiny went through like 2 boxes of pizza during that debate. But like those are the only things that I think could be construed as dunking. I mean, otherwise it was just the sort of usual debate analysis. But we should definitely finish the debateception by doing a stream watching that.
That was like when TMBS did Anna dunking on Dave Rubin, and they watched the video of Anna dunking on Dave Rubin, watching the video of Anna. I think that was the most watched clip we ever had at the time. Was like she was watching Dave Rubin get it, dunking on her, dunking on him.
You gotta get the live camera of them watching the stream.
Yeah, exactly. But next Monday, Abdul Al Sayed is going to be on, talk about his new book, his new book about Medicare for All, and Natalie Scher is going to be on during the second half, talking about strategy for achieving Medicare for All. So should be really good stuff. We'll see everybody then, and appreciate everybody for watching. And left is best.
Left is best.